The stone floor of the great hall bit into Morgan Winter's knees as she knelt before the court. Iron chains bound her wrists, cutting deeper with every slight movement. 23 years of survival instinct screamed at her to run, but where would she go? The guards at her back stood impassive, spears gleaming in the torchlight. The acrid smell of her own fear mingled with the sense of burning pitch and cold stone. She could feel her wolf cowering deep inside, whimpering, knowing that in this hall, before this man, there would be no escape. The Omega in her recognized the overwhelming power of the Alpha seated above her on his throne of black stone, carved from a single massive block quarried from the northern mountains, Harrison Ravencroft. Even his name carried weight in the shifter world. 35 years of life had carved him into something more than a man, more than a simple Alpha. He was the authority that commanded every pack in the kingdom, the ultimate power that settled disputes between rival alphas, the law itself made flesh and blood. His black hair fell past his shoulders, unbound in the way of warrior kings who needed no crown, and his golden eyes held all the warmth of a winter storm. A vertical scar cut through his right eyebrow, stark white against tanned skin. Today, he sat above her untouchable and absolute, radiating power that made weaker wolves bare their throats in submission. Morgan forced herself not to look away. If death was coming, she would meet it with dignity. Morgan Winters. The voice belonged to Lady Victoria Blackwood, who stood at the king's right hand. Her blonde hair was woven into elaborate braids adorned with thin silver chains that caught the torchlight. Her face was beautiful in the way of sharp things, and her smile never reached her pale blue eyes. You stand accused of trespassing in the forbidden archives of the North Tower, of attempting to steal sacred relics belonging to the crown, of espionage on behalf of rival packs who would see our kingdom fall. Morgan's throat was dry. She had expected arrest when the guards found her in that dusty room, surrounded by ancient records and forgotten histories. She had not expected this, not a public trial in the king's own hall, not charges that carried death. "What say you?" Harrison's voice rolled through the chamber. It was not loud, but every shifter present felt the command in those words, the absolute authority of the strongest Alpha in 5 generations. Morgan lifted her chin. "I was searching for information about my own bloodline, Your Majesty, about my grandmother's line. I meant no harm to the crown." "Your family?" Victoria's laugh was cutting. "You have no family, girl. Your pack cast you out years ago. You are nothing, a wanderer, an Omega without protection or purpose." The words struck true, each one a knife finding its mark. Morgan had been 16 when her pack discovered her gift. 16 when her father looked at her with disgust, called her unnatural. 16 when they threw her beyond their borders and told her never to return. 7 years of drifting from place to place, hiding what she was, working in taverns and stables, sleeping in barns or forests, trying to survive in a world that had no mercy for outcasts. "Even so," Morgan said, forcing strength into her voice, "I have the right to know where I came from." "You have no rights here." Magnus Ironhand spoke from the king's left side, arms crossed over his broad chest. The beta was 40 years old, his hair graying at the temples, his brown eyes severe. He wore the insignia of his rank, a silver wolf's head pinned to his dark tunic. "You violated sacred space. The archives are forbidden to all but the king's chosen. The penalty is death. There are no exceptions." Death. The word hung heavy between them. Morgan felt her wolf whimper, felt her heart hammer against her ribs. But she had not survived this long to give up without fighting. Her hand moved to her pocket, fingers closing around the small object she had found hidden among the dusty records. A silver medallion. Delicate and old, its surface tarnished with years, engraved with symbols she did not recognize. She had touched it without thinking, drawn by instinct, and the vision had struck her consciousness with the force of a blow. A young woman with long red hair that fell in waves, eyes the color of emeralds with flecks of gold, pale skin dotted with freckles, dying slowly, poison burning through her veins while she gasped for breath, whispering a name with her last breath. "I found something," Morgan said. In the archives, hidden, something that changes everything. Harrison leaned forward slightly, the first movement he had made. Torchlight caught the sharp planes of his face. "Speak plainly, Omega. My patience wears thin." Morgan pulled the medallion from her pocket with trembling fingers, holding it up so torchlight caught the tarnished silver. Several nobles gasped. Victoria's face went perfectly still, frozen. "I have a gift," Morgan said, forcing words past fear. "I can see memories through objects, through touch, images imprinted on metal and stone by those who held them in moments of great emotion. It is why my pack rejected me. They called it witchcraft, but it is what I am, a seer. When I touched this medallion, I saw her. I saw how she truly died." "Enough," Victoria snapped, composure cracking. "The girl is delusional, Your Majesty, mad from years alone. She seeks to manipulate this court with lies." But Harrison raised one hand, and silence fell absolute. His golden eyes fixed on Morgan, burning with intensity that made her want to look away. She forced herself to meet his gaze, to hold that terrible stare, even as her wolf whimpered. "Saw who?" His voice had gone dangerously quiet. Morgan took a breath. This was the moment. If she was wrong, she would die. If she was right, she might still die, but the truth would be spoken. "Callista," she whispered. The effect was instantaneous. Harrison surged to his feet, his aura exploding outward with such force that half the nobles took involuntary steps backward. The temperature seemed to drop. Torches flickered. Even Magnus looked shaken, his hand moving to his sword. "How do you know that name?" Harrison's voice was no longer human. It carried the growl of his wolf, the fury of 15 years of buried grief. "How dare you speak it in this hall?" Morgan's chains rattled as she trembled, but she kept her eyes on his. "Because I saw her die, Your Majesty. I saw the poison in her veins. I saw her alone in that tower, knowing she had been betrayed by those she trusted. I saw everything, and I know the truth about what happened to your mate." The silence was absolute. No one in the kingdom spoke of Callista. The name had been forbidden since her death 15 years ago, when the young Alpha King lost the only person who had touched his heart. The official story was illness, a fever that took her quickly, a tragedy that turned Harrison from a passionate ruler into the cold, merciless king before them. But Morgan had seen the truth, and she could see in his eyes, in how his jaw clenched and his hands trembled with rage, that he knew she was not lying. "Guards," Harrison said, voice rough. "Take her to the dungeons, the deep cells. No one is to touch her. No one is to question her. She speaks to no one but me." He turned his gaze to Victoria. "Summon Magnus to my chambers. We ride north at first light. Prepare provisions for 4 days and my personal guard." As guards hauled Morgan to her feet, she caught one last glimpse of Lady Victoria's face. For just a moment, beneath the carefully constructed mask, Morgan saw something that made her blood run cold. Fear, pure fear, in the eyes of the king's most trusted advisor. The medallion slipped from Morgan's fingers as they dragged her away, clattering against stone and spinning until it rested at Magnus's feet. But she had done what she came to do. She had spoken the forbidden name in the one place where it mattered most. And somewhere in the darkness of the castle dungeons, chained to a wall in a cell that had held traitors and murderers, Morgan Winters waited through the long night to discover if truth would save her or condemn her to the executioner's blade. The dungeon cell smelled of damp stone and old misery. Morgan sat with her back against the cold wall, chains still binding her wrists, the iron heavy enough that she could barely lift her arms. A single torch burned in the corridor beyond the iron bars, casting flickering shadows that danced across the rough walls. She had been here for hours, maybe longer. Time moved strangely in the darkness, stretched thin by fear and exhaustion. She closed her eyes and let herself remember. She had been 16 the first time the vision came. It was at a funeral, the mate of one of her pack's warriors who had fallen in a border skirmish. Morgan had gone to pay respects, as all pack members did, and the widow had taken her hand in gratitude. The moment their skin touched, the world had tilted sideways. Blood on snow, the warrior's final moments, an ambush in the forest, a blade through his ribs, his last thought for his mate, for the child she carried. Then darkness. Morgan had gasped and pulled away, stumbling backward, and the widow's face had transformed from grief to horror. Because Morgan had spoken aloud what she saw, had described the ambush in detail, the faces of the attackers, the way her mate had called the widow's name with his dying breath. Within a day, the whispers started. Witchcraft. Dark magic. Unnatural. Her father, a respected hunter in the pack, had looked at her with disgust. Her mother had wept, and the alpha had made his judgment clear: leave or be executed for bringing evil into their territory. She had left before dawn, 16 years old, with nothing but the clothes she wore and the knowledge that her own blood had rejected her. The sound of boots on stone pulled her from the memory. Morgan opened her eyes as torchlight grew brighter. 2 figures approached her cell. Harrison, no longer on his throne, but somehow even more intimidating in the confined space of the dungeon corridor. And Magnus, his hand resting on his sword hilt, his expression unreadable. A guard unlocked the cell door, and both men entered. The space felt suddenly smaller, the air thick with the Alpha King's power. Morgan pushed herself to her feet, her chains clinking, and forced herself to meet Harrison's gaze. "Explain," Harrison said. His voice was controlled now, the rage from the great hall banked, but not extinguished. "Everything. How you came to be in those archives, how you found that medallion, and how you know what you claim to know about Callista." Morgan took a breath, steadying herself. If she was going to die, let it be for speaking truth. "I came to the capital 3 weeks ago. I had heard that the royal archives contained records of old bloodlines, families whose gifts marked them as different. I thought perhaps I could find information about my grandmother. She was said to have the sight, though she died before I was born." "And you thought breaking into forbidden chambers was acceptable?" Magnus's voice was hard. "I thought," Morgan said quietly, "that understanding where I came from might help me understand what I am, why I was cursed with this ability." "It is not a curse," Harrison said, surprising her. "Perhaps the curse was never yours, Morgan. Perhaps it belonged to those who feared what they could not understand. His great-grandmother had the sight. She saved many lives with her visions, warned of attacks before they came. The gift runs in certain bloodlines, ancient ones. It is rare, but not evil." Morgan stared at him, something tight loosening in her chest. In 7 years, no one had called her gift anything but a curse. "The archives," Harrison prompted. "I found a way in through a servant's passage," Morgan continued. "I searched for 3 nights. Most of the records were about battles, treaties, land disputes. But yesterday, in the oldest section, I found a wooden box tucked into a crack in the stone wall. It was hidden deliberately, not filed with the other documents." "And inside?" Magnus asked. "The medallion, nothing else. The moment I touched it, the vision took me." Morgan closed her eyes, remembering. "I saw her. Red hair like autumn leaves, green eyes with gold flecks. She was in a stone room, a tower, I think, very high up. She was sick, weak, struggling to breathe. But it was not illness. I could feel the poison burning through her veins, taste the bitterness of it on her tongue." Harrison's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Morgan continued, her voice soft. "She knew she was dying, knew she had been betrayed. She pulled the medallion from her neck with shaking hands and hid it in a crack in the wall. She whispered a prayer that someone with the sight would find it, would see the truth. And then she spoke a name as her vision faded. 'Your name, Your Majesty.' She died alone, calling for you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Harrison turned away, his hands fisting at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Describe her." "Exactly." "Red hair that fell in waves past her shoulders," Morgan said immediately. "Eyes like emeralds with flecks of gold that caught the light. Freckles across her nose and cheeks. Pale skin. She was young, maybe 18. There was a small scar on her left wrist, white and thin, shaped almost like a crescent moon." Harrison's breath caught. He turned to face her, his golden eyes burning. "How could you possibly know about that scar? We never spoke of it publicly. She got it climbing a tree as a child, falling and catching her wrist on a branch." "Because I saw it in the vision," Morgan whispered, "and because she wore a necklace, amber beads on a silver chain. She touched it often, whenever she was nervous or scared." "Goddess above," Magnus breathed. "She is telling the truth." Harrison moved closer to Morgan, and she fought the urge to step back. Up close, his power was overwhelming, his scent of pine and winter storms filling her lungs. "The official story is that Callista died of a fever, that I had sent her to a tower in the north to recover, away from the pressures of court, that she passed peacefully in her sleep." "That is a lie," Morgan said quietly. "She was poisoned, deliberately, by someone who wanted her dead." "Do you know who?" The question was barely controlled. Morgan shook her head. "The vision only showed me her death, not who gave her the poison or why, but she knew. In her final moments, she knew she had been betrayed by people she trusted." Harrison was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Magnus. "You remember how she died? The messenger who brought word. The sealed coffin I was not permitted to see her in for fear of contagion." "I remember," Magnus said grimly. "I thought it strange at the time, but you were mad with grief. None of us questioned." "I should have questioned." Harrison's voice was filled with bitter self-recrimination. "I should have demanded to see her, fever or no fever. I should have known." He turned back to Morgan. "You said you saw a tower. Can you describe it? The location?" Morgan closed her eyes, pulling up the memory of the vision. "Stone walls, very thick. A single window looking north over forest. The room was circular, built into the top of a tower. I could see mountains in the distance through the window, and there was cold, bitter cold, even inside the room." "The Shadowlands," Magnus said immediately. "The old watchtower near the northern border. It has been abandoned for years, forbidden territory since Callista died there," Harrison finished. His eyes met Morgan's. "That is where the medallion showed you. That is where she was murdered." Morgan nodded. Harrison studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he made a decision. "You will come with us. To the tower. You will go to the place where she died, and you will use your gift to see more. To see everything." "Your Majesty," Magnus said carefully, "if she is lying, if this is some elaborate trick—" "It is not," Harrison said flatly. "No one alive knows the details she described. No one but me." And he looked at Morgan, and there was something dangerous in his gaze. "But understand this, Omega. If you are playing me false, if you are manipulating me with parlor tricks and lucky guesses, your death will not be quick. I will make you suffer in ways you cannot imagine. Do you understand?" Morgan lifted her chin. "I understand, Your Majesty, and I am not lying. I wish I were. This gift has brought me nothing but pain and exile, but it is what I am, and I saw what I saw." Harrison nodded slowly. "We leave at dawn. Magnus, have the guards bring her to the upper chambers. Give her food, clean clothes, and a room with a lock on the outside. She is not a guest, but she is no longer to be treated as a common prisoner." "As you command," Magnus said. As they turned to leave, Morgan found her voice. "Your Majesty, the medallion. May I see it again?" Harrison paused, then pulled the silver piece from his pocket. He had retrieved it from the great hall. He held it out, and Morgan reached for it with her chained hands. The moment her fingers brushed the metal, the vision flashed again. Callista's face, pale and beautiful even in death. Her green eyes fixed on something Morgan could not see, and words, whispered so faintly Morgan almost missed them. "Tell him I loved him. Tell him about the child." Morgan gasped and pulled back, the vision releasing her. She stared at Harrison, her heart hammering. "She wanted you to know she loved you, even at the end." That was her last thought. Something in Harrison's expression cracked, just for a moment. Then the mask slammed back into place. "Get her upstairs," he said to Magnus, his voice rough. "We ride north at first light." And as Morgan was led from the cell, her chains finally removed, her wrists raw and aching, she wondered what other secrets the tower in the Shadowlands would reveal. What other truths had died with Callista that night, 15 years ago? The truth that might save Morgan's life, or condemn them all. Dawn broke cold and gray over the castle courtyard. Morgan stood near the stables, wrapped in a cloak that was too large for her, borrowed from the servants' quarters. Her wrists still bore red marks from the chains, but clean bandages now covered them. She had eaten her first real meal in weeks the night before, slept in a bed with clean linens, and woken to find traveling clothes laid out for her. Practical wool and leather, sturdy boots. 8 horses waited in the courtyard, their breath misting in the cold air. 6 guards in the king's colors, their armor polished, weapons at their sides. Magnus, checking saddles and provisions. And Harrison, standing apart from the others, his black hair pulled back, his golden eyes fixed on the northern horizon. He had not spoken to Morgan since the dungeon. A stable hand brought her a horse, a gentle mare with kind eyes. Morgan took the reins, grateful. She mounted carefully, settling into the saddle, and the mare shifted beneath her. Harrison swung onto his own mount, a massive black stallion that tossed its head and stamped. "We ride hard," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. 4 days to the Shadowlands if we push. No unnecessary stops. We sleep rough and eat in the saddle. Anyone who cannot keep pace will be left behind. His eyes flicked to Morgan for just a moment, a challenge in that gaze. She lifted her chin. She had survived 7 years alone. She would survive this. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, passing through the castle gates and into the city beyond. Merchants setting up their stalls, children running through streets, shifters of all ranks going about their routines. Some stopped to watch the Alpha King pass, bowing their heads. Others barely glanced up, too consumed with survival to care about royal business. They left the city behind by midday, following a road that cut north through farmland and forest. The pace Harrison set was punishing. The horses ran when the ground was clear, slowed to a fast walk when terrain grew rough. Morgan's thighs burned, her back ached, but she gritted her teeth and kept up. The guards watched her with curiosity and suspicion, but said nothing. They stopped briefly at midday to water the horses at a stream. Morgan dismounted carefully, her legs nearly giving out. She knelt by the water, splashing her face, drinking deeply. The cold shocked her system, but helped clear the fog of exhaustion. "You ride well for an Omega." Magnus's voice made her turn. The Beta stood nearby, his expression measuring. "Where did you learn?" "Various places," Morgan said carefully. "When you travel alone, you learn many things, or you die." 7 years of wandering, Magnus said. "That is a long time to survive without a pack." "Yes," Morgan agreed quietly. "And now you find yourself traveling with the Alpha King, hunting for truth about a murder 15 years old." Magnus's brown eyes were sharp. "You must wonder if you would have been better off staying in the shadows." Morgan looked at him directly. "Every day since I was 16, I have wondered if I would have been better off dying in my home pack. But I did not die. I survived. And if my gift can finally serve some purpose beyond bringing me pain, then perhaps there was a reason I lived this long." Magnus studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If you are lying to him, I will kill you myself. But if you are telling the truth, if you can give him closure about Callista, then you have my protection." "Thank you," Morgan said, surprised. "Mount up," Harrison's voice cut through the clearing. "We move." They rode until sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and red. When they finally stopped, Morgan slid from her horse and had to catch herself against the mare's side, her legs shaking. One of the guards took her reins wordlessly. They made camp in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. The guards worked with smooth coordination, building a fire, unpacking provisions, setting watch. Morgan sank onto a fallen log, too exhausted to help, too aware they would not welcome her assistance. She was the outsider here, the prisoner given temporary freedom. Magnus brought her dried meat and hard bread. "Eat. Tomorrow will be harder." Morgan ate mechanically, her jaw working against the tough meat. Around the fire, the guards talked quietly. About the journey ahead, about weather turning cold, about nothing of consequence. Harrison sat apart from them all, his back against a tree, his eyes fixed on the flames. Night fell completely, stars emerging overhead. Morgan pulled her borrowed cloak tighter against the chill. Her body ached everywhere. "You should sleep while you can," one of the guards said, not unkindly. "The king will have us moving before dawn." Morgan nodded and moved away from the fire, finding a spot near the edge of the clearing where she could rest against a tree trunk. She wrapped herself in her cloak and closed her eyes, willing sleep to come despite the cold. But sleep was slow. Her mind kept returning to the vision, to Callista's dying face, the poison in her veins, the betrayal in her eyes, the whispered words about a child. She had not told Harrison that part, had pulled back before she could reveal it, because that secret felt too raw, too devastating to speak aloud in a dungeon cell with Magnus listening. But she would have to tell him eventually. When they reached the tower, when she touched the stones where Callista had died, she would see everything, and he would demand to know it all, including the truth about the child who had died with her. Morgan must have dozed, because she jerked awake to find someone standing over her. Her heart hammered before she recognized the silhouette. Harrison. "You spoke in your sleep," he said quietly. His voice was rough, tired. "About betrayal, about people she trusted." Morgan's mouth was dry. "It is what I saw in the vision." She knew, at the end, that someone close to her had done this. Harrison was silent for a long moment. Then he lowered himself to sit on the ground near her, his back against the same tree, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, but not touching. "Tell me about her. What you saw. Not just how she died, but who she was in those final moments." Morgan closed her eyes, pulling up the memory. She was frightened, in terrible pain, but she was also angry. There was fire in her, even as the poison stole her strength. She fought until the very end, and her last thoughts were not of herself, but of you, of making sure you would know the truth. "She was always like that," Harrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Fierce, stubborn. She would argue with me about pack politics, about how I ruled, about everything. She was the only person in my life who was not afraid to tell me when I was wrong." He paused. "I loved her for it." Morgan opened her eyes and looked at him. In the starlight, his profile was sharp and beautiful, but there was such pain etched into his features that it hurt to see. "What happened? Why was she in that tower?" "She was with child," Harrison said softly, and Morgan's breath caught. She had suspected it from her vision, but hearing him confirm it made it real. "The healer said she was weak and needed rest. She never told me. Perhaps she wanted to surprise me. But I felt it, Morgan. I felt there was life growing inside her." 3 months along, Morgan said softly, making a decision to reveal what she knew. The court physicians had advised rest, away from the stress of court. Lady Victoria suggested the northern tower, said the air would be good for her, that she would be safe and comfortable there. His jaw clenched. I believed them. Believed that sending her away was protecting her and the babe. Instead, I sent her to her death. "You could not have known," Morgan said softly. "I should have." Harrison's voice turned bitter. "I am the Alpha King. It is my duty to protect what is mine. And I failed her, failed our child. For 15 years I have lived with that failure. But perhaps the true failure was letting guilt blind me when she needed me most. And now you tell me it was not illness that took her, but murder. That someone I trusted deliberately killed my mate and my heir." Morgan's heart ached for him, for the young man he had been, barely 20 years old, losing everything. For the king he had become, hard and cold, because the alternative was breaking under the weight of his grief. "That is why we ride to the tower," she said, "to find out who, to give you justice." Harrison turned his head to look at her, his golden eyes catching the starlight. "And what do you want from this, Morgan Winters? What do you gain by helping me?" Morgan met his gaze steadily. "I want to prove that my gift is not a curse, that it can serve a purpose. And I want to survive. Those are the only things I have wanted for 7 years." Something shifted in Harrison's expression, softening just slightly. "If you help me find the truth, if your visions lead to justice for Callista, I will give you a place in this kingdom, a position in the court, protection under my rule. You will never have to wander alone again." Morgan's throat tightened. "And if I fail?" "Then at least we both tried," Harrison said quietly. "That is more than I have done for her in 15 years. He stood, brushing dirt from his clothes. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we enter the deep forest. The Shadowlands lie beyond. And whatever truth waits in that tower, we will face it together." He walked back to his post by the fire, leaving Morgan alone with her thoughts and the sound of wind through the pines. She pulled her cloak tighter and closed her eyes, but sleep was even more elusive now, because she had heard something in the Alpha King's voice that terrified her more than threats of death ever could. Hope. And hope, she had learned long ago, was the most dangerous thing a person could carry. The second day's ride was harder than the first. They left at first light, pushing deeper into increasingly wild territory. The road narrowed to a trail, then to barely a track through dense forest. Ancient pines rose around them, blocking out much of the light, creating a perpetual twilight even at midday. Morgan felt eyes upon them from the shadows between trees. Not human or wolf, but something else. Something older. The Shadowlands had a reputation even among the bravest shifters. It was a place where the laws of nature seemed to bend slightly, where the boundaries between worlds thinned. "Keep close," Magnus called back to her when she fell slightly behind. "These woods have a way of swallowing stragglers." Morgan urged her mare forward, keeping pace. She noticed that the guards had grown quieter, more alert. Even Harrison rode with one hand near his sword. They made camp that night in a small hollow between massive tree roots. The fire seemed dimmer here, the darkness beyond it thicker. Morgan ate silently, watching Harrison across the flames. He had not spoken to her since their conversation the previous night, but she felt his gaze on her occasionally, measuring, considering. She was dozing fitfully when the sounds of struggle woke her. Morgan bolted upright to see the camp in chaos. Dark shapes moved at the edge of the firelight, larger than wolves, their eyes reflecting green in the darkness. Not wolves, but something else. Something wrong. "Shadow wolves!" Magnus shouted, drawing his sword. "Form a circle!" The guards leapt to their feet, weapons ready. Harrison had already transformed partially, his face elongating, claws extending from his fingers. He stood protectively between the attackers and the camp. One of the creatures lunged forward into the light. Morgan gasped. It looked like a wolf, but wrong, as if made from darkness itself. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, and it had too many teeth in a mouth that opened wider than should be possible. "Stay back," Harrison growled at her, not taking his eyes off the creatures. "These are not natural beasts." Morgan scrambled backward, but one of the shadow wolves had circled around behind. It lunged at her, and she rolled aside just in time, feeling claws tear through her cloak. "Morgan!" Harrison shouted, turning to help her. In that moment of distraction, 3 more shadow wolves attacked. One caught Harrison's arm in its jaws. He roared in pain and fury, tearing the creature from him and smashing it against a tree trunk where it dissolved into mist. Morgan grabbed a burning branch from the fire and swung it at the shadow wolf stalking her. The creature shrank back from the flames, hissing. The battle seemed to last forever, though it was probably only minutes. The guards fought well, but 2 fell to the shadow wolves' attacks. Magnus moved like a dancer despite his age, his sword a silver arc in the darkness. Harrison was magnificent in his fury. Half transformed, he tore through the shadow wolves with brutal efficiency, his roars echoing through the forest. But there were too many, and they kept coming from the darkness. "Run!" Magnus shouted to Morgan. "They want you! Go! We will hold them!" Morgan hesitated for only a second, then bolted into the forest. She heard Harrison's enraged howl behind her, but didn't look back. The shadow wolves pursued, their eerie breathing close behind. She ran blindly through the trees, branches tearing at her face and hands. The darkness seemed alive, reaching for her. She stumbled into a small clearing and found herself face to face with a shadow wolf, its green eyes boring into hers. Morgan froze, paralyzed with terror. The creature stalked toward her slowly, savoring her fear. A black blur crashed into the shadow wolf from the side. Harrison, fully transformed now into an enormous black wolf, his golden eyes blazing in the darkness. He stood over the dissolving remains of the shadow wolf, then turned to Morgan, teeth bared. "Harrison," she whispered. "It's me." The massive wolf stared at her for a long moment, then his form began to shift, bones cracking, fur receding, until the man stood before her again. Blood ran from multiple wounds on his arms and chest. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, moving closer to inspect her. "No, just scared," Morgan said, her voice shaking. "What were those things?" "Corrupted spirits," Harrison said grimly. "Something or someone has been practicing dark magic in these woods." He looked around, alert for more danger. "We need to find Magnus and the others." "You think someone sent those creatures?" Morgan asked. "That this was deliberate?" Harrison's eyes met hers, hard with certainty. "Those shadow wolves were targeting you specifically. Someone does not want us to reach that tower. Someone does not want you to use your gift." "Victoria," Morgan whispered. "Perhaps," Harrison acknowledged, "or someone else who fears what you might discover." He held out his hand to her. "Come. It's not safe to be separated in these woods." Morgan took his hand, and something unexpected happened. The moment their skin touched, a jolt ran through her, as if she had touched a live coal. Images flooded her mind. Harrison receiving the news of Callista's death, his knees buckling, his roar of grief shaking the castle walls. Harrison at her funeral, stone-faced, refusing to break before his people. Harrison, alone in his chambers, destroying everything in his path, transformed half to wolf, mad with grief. She gasped and pulled away, overwhelmed by the intensity of his memories. Harrison stared at her, his eyes wide. "What did you see?" "You," Morgan said softly. "Your grief. The day you learned of her death." His face hardened. "You had no right to see that." "I don't control it," Morgan said. "It happens when I touch people during moments of strong emotion. I'm sorry." Harrison looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once, accepting her apology. "We need to move. The others will head for the road. We should do the same." They traveled through the forest for hours, Harrison leading with the confidence of someone who had memorized maps of the territory. Occasionally he would stop, head tilted, listening for sounds of pursuit. They found no sign of Magnus or the remaining guards. "He's a survivor," Harrison said when Morgan expressed concern. "Magnus has survived worse than this. He will find his way to the tower." Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the road again. There was no sign of their companions, but Harrison seemed unconcerned. "They will catch up," he said with certainty. "For now, we press on to the tower. It's less than a day's journey from here." "On foot?" Morgan asked, exhausted from the night's ordeal. Harrison's mouth quirked in what might almost have been a smile. "Afraid you can't keep up, Omega?" Morgan straightened, pride overriding fatigue. "I can keep up." They walked through the day, stopping only briefly to rest and drink from a stream. Harrison moved with tireless grace, his stride eating up the miles. Morgan matched him step for step, refusing to show weakness. They spoke little, conserving energy, but the silence between them had changed. It was no longer tense with suspicion, but companionable, united by shared purpose and shared danger. Late in the afternoon, they crested a rise, and Harrison stopped. Morgan came up beside him and felt her breath catch. Below them, in a small valley, stood the tower. It was taller than she had expected, rising perhaps 50 feet from the forest floor. Stone, gray, and weathered, covered in ivy, a single window visible at the top, just as she had seen in her vision. "The Northern Watchtower," Harrison said, his voice tight with emotion. "Built 3 centuries ago to guard against invasions from the mountain tribes. Abandoned after the Great Peace, until Callista died there," Morgan finished softly. Harrison nodded, his eyes fixed on the tower. "I came here once, After her death. I stood outside, but could not bring myself to enter, to see where she had spent her final days. His hands clenched into fists. I was a coward. You were grieving, Morgan corrected gently. I was king, Harrison said, as if that explained everything. I should have demanded answers then. I should have questioned why her body was burned so quickly, why I was not permitted to see her. If I had, perhaps Victoria would have killed you too, Morgan said, or arranged an accident. She had already murdered your mate and your unborn child. Do you think she would have hesitated to eliminate you if you threatened her plans? Harrison looked at her, surprised by her bluntness. The past cannot be changed, Morgan continued, but you are here now, ready to face the truth, whatever it may be. That is not cowardice, Harrison. That is courage. For a moment, something warm flickered in his golden eyes. Then his expression shuddered again. We make camp here tonight, he decided. We enter the tower at first light. If Magnus and the others have not found us by then, we proceed alone. They built a small fire, sheltered from view by a rocky outcropping. Harrison produced dried meat and hard bread from a pouch at his belt. They ate in silence, watching the tower as shadows lengthened across the valley. Tell me about your life, Harrison said suddenly. These 7 years alone. Morgan looked up, surprised by the request. Why do you want to know? You have seen inside my memories, Harrison said. You know my pain. It seems only fair I know something of yours. Morgan considered, then nodded. After my pack exiled me, I wandered south. I was 16, terrified, with no skills except hunting. The first winter nearly killed me. I sought shelter in a barn, and the farmer found me. I thought he would kill me, but instead, he gave me work. For almost a year, I had a home of sorts. What happened? Harrison asked when she fell silent. His daughter fell from a horse. I tried to help her, touched her arm, and saw a vision of her future. She would die by spring unless they sought a particular healer in the mountains. I told them what I saw. Morgan's mouth twisted. The farmer called me witch, drove me off with a pitchfork. I later heard they had not heeded my warning. The girl died exactly as I had seen. So you learned to hide your gift, Harrison surmised. I learned that people fear what they do not understand. After that, I moved constantly. Stable hand, tavern girl, kitchen helper. I never stayed more than a few months in any place, never formed attachments, never touched anyone if I could avoid it. A lonely existence, Harrison said quietly. Morgan shrugged. Loneliness was safer than rejection, safer than the stake or the noose that awaited witches in some territories. Harrison's expression darkened. Those territories are not under my rule. In my kingdom, gifts like yours are rare, but protected by law. Perhaps in theory, Morgan said, but do the common folk know that? Does every village alpha honor those laws, or do they drive out those who are different, calling it protection of the pack? Harrison had no answer for that, and they lapsed into silence again. The fire burned low between them, orange embers against the gathering dark. You should sleep, Harrison said eventually. Tomorrow will not be easy. Will you sleep? Morgan asked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I am Alpha King. I have learned to do without many things, including sleep. That doesn't answer my question, Morgan observed. I will watch, Harrison said. The shadow wolves may return, and Victoria may have other servants in these woods. Morgan settled on her side, using her arm as a pillow, her back to the fire. She was exhausted, but sleep seemed impossible with the tower looming in the darkness, with all that awaited them tomorrow. Harrison, she said softly. Yes? I'm sorry about Callista, and the child. Truly. There was a long silence, and Morgan thought he might not respond. Then his voice came, quiet but clear in the night. Thank you, Morgan. So am I. She closed her eyes, and eventually exhaustion claimed her. Her dreams were troubled, filled with shadow wolves and a red-haired woman crying out for help from a tower window. And through it all, a sense of something forming between her and the Alpha King, something neither of them had asked for, but which might save them both, or destroy them utterly. Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of violet and gold as Morgan and Harrison approached the tower. The morning mist clung to the valley floor, swirling around their ankles as they walked. No sign of Magnus or the other guards had appeared during the night. They would face whatever waited in the tower alone. Morgan studied the structure as they drew closer. Time had not been kind to the northern watchtower. Stones had fallen from the upper sections, creating a jagged silhouette against the brightening sky. The wooden door hung partially from its hinges, rotted by years of exposure. Ivy and climbing plants had claimed much of the exterior, nature slowly reclaiming what man had built. "This place feels wrong," Morgan said softly, her wolf stirring uneasily inside her. "Like the land itself remembers what happened here." Harrison nodded, his face grim. Blood spilled in betrayal leaves a mark that does not easily fade. He drew his sword, the steel gleaming in the early light. "Stay behind me." They approached the entrance, Harrison moving with the silent grace of a predator. The door groaned as he pushed it fully open, revealing a circular chamber filled with rubble and dust. Weak sunlight filtered through cracks in the ceiling, creating slanted beams that illuminated dancing motes of dust. "The staircase should be along the wall," Harrison said, examining the room. "There." He pointed to a stone spiral staircase that wound upward along the curved wall of the tower. Morgan felt her heartbeat quicken. Somewhere above them was the room where Callista had died, the room where Victoria had stood over her, cold and triumphant, watching poison drain the life from the king's mate and unborn child. "Many steps are missing," Harrison observed, testing the first one with his boot. "We'll need to be careful." The ascent was treacherous. Sections of the staircase had crumbled away entirely, forcing them to jump across gaps or find alternate paths by climbing along the rough stone wall. Harrison moved with confident strength, often reaching back to help Morgan across the more dangerous sections. Each time their hands touched, Morgan felt a spark of awareness, a connection that went beyond the physical, but neither acknowledged it. Finally, they reached the uppermost chamber. Harrison paused at the entrance, his hand tight on his sword hilt, his shoulders tense with suppressed emotion. "This is where it happened," Morgan said quietly. "Where she died." Harrison nodded once, unable to speak. After a moment of gathering himself, he stepped inside. The circular room was much as Morgan had seen in her vision. A single window faced north, offering a view of endless forest and distant mountains. The floor was stone, cracked and uneven. In the center, Morgan could see dark stains that 15 years had failed to erase completely. Blood. Callista's blood. Harrison stood immobile, staring at those stains. His face had gone pale, his golden eyes burning with a mixture of grief and rage so powerful that Morgan could almost feel it radiating from him like heat. "She was here," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Alone, dying, while I was miles away, believing she was safe." Morgan approached the center of the room slowly, drawn to those dark stains. "I need to touch it," she said. "The stone where she died. I'll see everything." Harrison nodded, stepping back to give her space. Morgan knelt beside the stains, her heart hammering against her ribs. This would be no slight vision, no brief glimpse of memory. Touching the place of Callista's death would plunge her fully into that moment, make her witness to everything that had happened. She took a deep breath to steady herself, then pressed both palms flat against the cold stone. The vision struck with the force of a physical blow. Morgan gasped, her body going rigid as the present fell away, replaced by memory embedded in stone through a dying woman's agony. Callista lay on a simple pallet in the center of the room. Her once vibrant red hair was dull with sweat and sickness, spread across the rough blanket like spilled wine. Her skin had the translucent quality of fine porcelain, blue veins visible beneath. Her hands rested protectively over her slightly swollen belly, where a child of 3 months grew. Victoria stood over her, elegant and cold in a gown of midnight blue. Her blonde hair was arranged in an elaborate style, adorned with silver pins that caught the light from the single lamp. She looked down at Callista with an expression of clinical detachment, as if observing an experiment rather than a woman's death. "Why?" Callista whispered, her voice weak but defiant. "We trusted you. Harrison trusted you." "Exactly," Victoria replied, her tone conversational, as if discussing the weather rather than murder. "His trust makes him weak. You made him weak. A king does not need love, girl. He needs power, control, and an heir would have given him both. A direct line, no need for advisors, for the council. He would have ruled absolutely. I could not allow that." "Monster," Callista breathed, a tear sliding down her pale cheek. "You murdered your king's child." "I saved the kingdom from tyranny," Victoria corrected, adjusting her gloves with fastidious care. "The wolves need balance, a king guided by his counsel, not a dictator with absolute power." "He will know," Callista said, her green eyes fierce despite her failing strength. "Somehow, someday, he will discover what you've done." Victoria's smile was cold. "I think not. The poison will finish its work by morning. I will send word that you died of fever. He will grieve, but he will move on, and I will ensure he rules as he should, guided, controlled." She turned toward the door, pausing to look back once. "If it's any consolation, your death serves a greater purpose. The stability of the kingdom requires sacrifice." Then Victoria was gone, and Callista was alone. She struggled to her feet, swaying with weakness, and crossed to the small wooden box where her few possessions were kept. From it, she withdrew the silver medallion, clutching it in trembling fingers. "Goddess," she whispered, "let someone find this, someone who can see. Let the truth be known." She pressed the medallion to her lips, then concealed it in a crack in the wall. Exhausted by even this small effort, she crawled back to her pallet. As the poison worked its final damage, stealing her breath and slowing her heart, she sang softly to the child who would die with her, a lullaby for the heir who would never draw breath. And as darkness claimed her, her final thoughts were of Harrison, his smile, his laugh, the future they would never share. The vision released Morgan with brutal suddenness. She fell forward, catching herself on shaking arms, gasping for breath. Tears streamed down her face, her body trembling with the echo of Callista's pain. "Morgan!" Harrison's voice seemed to come from very far away. She felt his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. "What did you see? Tell me." Morgan raised her head with effort, meeting his desperate gaze. "Victoria," she said, her voice breaking on the name. "It was Victoria. She came to the tower. She told Callista why. Said an heir would give you too much power, that she needed you controlled, guided by the council." Harrison's face went white with shock, then darkened with fury. "Victoria murdered my mate, murdered my child, and I kept her at my side for 15 years. His voice rose to a roar that shook dust from the rafters. "I let her advise me, let her stand at my right hand while she smiled and lied." His aura exploded outward, raw power that made the stones tremble. His body began to shift. Not fully, not yet. Harrison was a king accustomed to mastering even his beast, but in this moment, control slipped away from him. Fur rippled across his skin, his eyes blazed fully gold, his teeth lengthened to deadly points. Morgan felt his rage and grief crash over her like a physical wave, the emotion so powerful it nearly drove her to her knees again. Harrison threw back his head and howled, a sound of such pure anguish that Morgan felt it in her very bones. She scrambled to her feet, her own grief mingling with his. Without thinking, operating on instinct alone, she reached out and touched his arm. The moment her fingers made contact with his skin, everything changed. A jolt ran through her, electric and overwhelming. She felt him, not just his rage, but everything beneath it. The 20-year-old boy who had loved Callista with his whole heart. The man who had tried to protect her and failed. The king who had lived 15 years in darkness, believing a lie about his mate's death. And beneath it all, buried so deep he might not even recognize it yet, she felt something else. A pull, a recognition, a bond beginning to form between them, fragile as spider silk, but undeniably real. The mate bond, starting to wake. Harrison felt it too. She saw the moment he recognized what was happening. His eyes locked on hers, wide with shock, his partial transformation halting. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other, connected by something neither had asked for, but which the goddess had, in her mysterious way, granted them. Then Harrison wrenched away, breaking contact. He staggered back, breathing ragged. "No," he said. "No, not now. Not like this." Morgan's hand fell to her side, still tingling from the contact. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I did not mean—" "It does not matter," Harrison cut her off. His voice was harsh, control fraying at the edges. He turned away, facing the window, his back rigid with tension. "This changes nothing. Victoria will pay for what she has done. We return to the castle immediately." Morgan stood in silence, her heart racing. The bond that had begun to form between them hummed like a plucked string, faint but unmistakable. She had never expected to find a mate, not after her exile. Most Omegas lived and died alone once rejected by their birth packs, and of all the wolves in the kingdom, fate had chosen to link her to the Alpha King himself, a man still haunted by his dead mate. "Harrison," she began, not knowing what she would say but feeling compelled to speak. "Not now," he said, and there was something like pleading beneath the command in his voice. I will not discuss this. Victoria has lived 15 years believing her secret safe. She will not escape justice because we delayed." Morgan nodded, accepting his decision for now. The bond was new, barely formed, and they had more pressing matters to address. "What will you do?" she asked. "I will arrest her the moment we return," Harrison said, his voice cold and precise. "She will face trial before the Council of Alphas. Her conspiracy will be exposed, and then she will die, painfully, as my mate and child died." "She will have allies," Morgan warned. 15 years is a long time to build a network of influence. "Let them stand with her," Harrison said, turning back to face Morgan. His eyes still burned gold, but he had regained control of his shift. "They will fall with her." A sound from below interrupted them, the scrape of boots on stone. Harrison moved instantly, placing himself between Morgan and the doorway, sword raised. "Your Majesty?" Magnus's voice called up the stairwell. "Here," Harrison responded, relaxing slightly. "We're above." Moments later, Magnus appeared in the doorway, dusty and disheveled, but very much alive. Behind him came 2 of the guards who had accompanied them from the castle. "The Shadow Wolves?" Harrison asked. "Defeated, though at cost," Magnus said grimly. "We lost Thorn and Kell." Harrison's jaw tightened. "They died with honor, protecting their king. They will be remembered." Magnus nodded, then looked at Morgan. "You found what you came for?" "We did," Harrison said before she could answer. "Victoria is responsible for Callista's death. She poisoned my mate and my unborn child to maintain her control over the throne." Magnus's expression darkened with fury. "The treacherous bitch. She's been at your right hand for 15 years, all while knowing—" "She will pay," Harrison said with deadly certainty. "Prepare to leave immediately. We ride for the castle without stopping." "My king," one of the guards said hesitantly. "The horses were scattered during the Shadow Wolf attack. We've recovered only 3. Harrison considered this information. "Then we ride double. Magnus, you and Riven take 1 mount. Thorn and I will take another. Morgan will ride with me." Morgan's pulse quickened at his words, but she kept her expression neutral. More physical contact would only strengthen the nascent bond between them, something Harrison surely knew. Yet he had made this decision anyway. They descended the crumbling staircase with more haste than caution, eager to be away from the tower and its ghosts. Outside, 3 horses waited, stamping impatiently in the morning light. The mist had burned away, revealing a clear day, though dark clouds gathered on the northern horizon, promising rain by nightfall. Harrison mounted his stallion with fluid grace, then extended his hand to Morgan. She took it, feeling again that jolt of connection, and he pulled her up behind him as if she weighed nothing. "Hold tight," he instructed, his voice carefully neutral. "We ride hard." Morgan wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him, the strength in the muscles beneath her fingers. She tried to maintain some distance between their bodies, but as the horse began to move, momentum pressed her against his back. The journey back was a blur of speed and jarring motion. Harrison set a punishing pace, driving them forward with single-minded determination. They stopped only when necessary for the horse's sake, eating in the saddle when they ate at all. Morgan's body ached from the relentless pace, but she made no complaint. Her discomfort was nothing compared to the urgency of their mission. They slept briefly the first night, huddled beneath the trees as rain poured down. Morgan kept her distance from Harrison, sensing his need for space. The bond between them was a live thing now, humming with awareness whenever they were close. She could feel his emotions as faint echoes of her own, his rage, his grief, his confusion about what was happening between them. On the second night, as they made camp in a small clearing, Harrison finally spoke of what they both felt. "This bond," he said, his voice low to avoid being overheard by Magnus and the guards. "I did not expect it." "Nor did I," Morgan said carefully. "The goddess works in mysterious ways." "Cruel ways," Harrison said bitterly. 15 years I mourned Callista. 15 years I carried the weight of her death. And now, when I discover she was murdered, when all my grief turns to rage and vengeance, now the goddess sends me a second mate? Morgan flinched at his tone but held her ground. "I did not ask for this either, Harrison. I have spent 7 years alone, believing I would never have a pack, let alone a mate. Do you think I wanted to bond with a king who sees me as an inconvenience at best, a reminder of loss at worst?" Harrison's eyes widened slightly, surprised by her directness. Then something in his expression softened. "You are not an inconvenience, Morgan, nor are you a reminder of loss. You are unexpected. As are you," she said. They fell silent, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Harrison spoke again. "We will deal with Victoria first. Everything else must wait." Morgan nodded her agreement. "Justice for Callista comes first." The third day of travel brought them to more populated territory. They passed small villages and farms, people stopping to stare as the Alpha King and his small company galloped past. Harrison ignored them all, focused solely on reaching the castle. As they crested the final hill, the capital city spread before them, sunlight gleaming on its stone walls and tiled roofs. The castle rose from the center, ancient and imposing, its towers reaching toward the sky. "Home," Magnus murmured. "Not quite," Harrison said coldly. "Not until Victoria answers for her crimes." They rode through the city gates at sunset, citizens scattering before their thundering hooves. Guards at the castle entrance snapped to attention as they recognized their king, hurrying to take the exhausted horses as the riders dismounted. "Your Majesty," the captain of the guard said, bowing deeply, "we did not expect your return so soon." "Where is Lady Victoria?" Harrison demanded without preamble. The captain looked startled. "In the Eastern Solar, I believe, with the trade delegates from the Southern Territories." "Have her arrested immediately," Harrison commanded. "Bring her to the throne room in chains." The captain's eyes widened in shock. "Arrested, Your Majesty?" "For high treason and regicide," Harrison growled. "Now!" The captain swallowed hard, then nodded. "At once, Your Majesty." Harrison turned to Morgan and Magnus. "Come, we will await her in the throne room." They strode through the castle corridors, servants and courtiers pressing themselves against the walls at the sight of their king's thunderous expression. Word of their return, and Harrison's shocking order, spread ahead of them like wildfire. The throne room was empty when they entered, the great space echoing with their footsteps. Harrison did not take his seat on the black stone throne, but paced before it like a caged predator. "Magnus," he said after a moment, "send word to the Council of Alphas. They must be summoned immediately to witness Victoria's confession and pass judgment." "They will take days to assemble," Magnus pointed out. "Then she will wait in the dungeon until they arrive," Harrison said coldly. "I have waited 15 years for justice. I can wait a few days more to see it done properly." Morgan stood to the side, feeling out of place in the grand hall. The weight of what was to come pressed on her. She would be required to testify, to explain her visions to the skeptical council of alphas. Many would doubt her, dismiss her gift as trickery or madness. The thought made her stomach knot with anxiety. Harrison seemed to sense her unease. He paused in his pacing to look at her. "You will be protected," he said quietly. "No one will harm you under my roof." "It is not harm I fear," Morgan admitted. "It is disbelief. Many will not accept visions as evidence." "They will accept the testimony of Father Nathaniel," came a voice from the doorway. They turned to see a stooped, elderly man in priest's robes entering the throne room. His face was lined with age and what appeared to be a lifetime of worry, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Father Nathaniel," Harrison said, surprise evident in his voice. "What do you mean?" The old priest approached slowly, leaning on a wooden staff. When he reached them, he knelt with difficulty before the king. "Rise," Harrison commanded immediately. "You are too old for such formalities." Father Nathaniel struggled to his feet, aided by Morgan's gentle hand on his elbow. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice quavering but firm, "I have come to confess a terrible sin of omission. For 15 years, I have kept silent about what I knew, about Lady Victoria's crime." Harrison went still, his golden eyes fixed on the priest. "You knew?" "Not at first," Nathaniel said, "but soon after. I heard Victoria speaking with Counselor Marcus about the poison, about how convenient it was that the young queen had died before giving birth to an heir." The old man's hands trembled. "I found documents, letters, records of payment for rare poisons, but Victoria discovered that I knew. She threatened my family, my grandchildren. I was a coward, Your Majesty. I hid the evidence and kept silent." "Where is this evidence now?" Magnus demanded. Father Nathaniel reached into his robes and withdrew a leather satchel. "Here. I have kept it hidden all these years, but I am old now, and my family is beyond Victoria's reach. I can no longer let an innocent woman's murder go unavenged." Harrison took the satchel with reverent care, opening it to reveal yellowed parchments and leather-bound journals. He examined them briefly, his expression darkening as he read. "This is everything we need," he said finally, looking up at Morgan. "Your visions led us to the truth, but these documents will convince even the most skeptical alpha." Before Morgan could respond, the doors of the throne room burst open. 4 guards entered, dragging a struggling Victoria between them. Her elegant appearance was disheveled, her hair falling from its elaborate style, her fine gown rumpled. "What is the meaning of this outrage?" she demanded, her voice cold with fury. "Release me at once. I am the king's advisor." "You are a murderer," Harrison said, his voice cutting through her protests like a blade. "A traitor of the highest order." Victoria went still, her pale eyes darting from Harrison to Morgan, then to the documents in the king's hands. For just a moment, fear flickered across her face before her mask of indignation returned. "What nonsense is this?" she said with a brittle laugh. "Have you lost your mind, Harrison?" "I know what you did," Harrison said, advancing toward her with predatory grace. "I know you poisoned Callista. I know you murdered my unborn child. I know everything, Victoria." "The Omega has addled your brain with her witchcraft," Victoria spat, her gaze venomous as it landed on Morgan. "She is manipulating you, can't you see? Using some dark magic to turn you against your most loyal advisor." "My most loyal advisor would not have murdered my mate," Harrison growled, his control slipping, golden eyes beginning to glow with rage. "Morgan saw the truth through her gift, and Father Nathaniel has provided all the evidence needed to condemn you." Victoria's gaze snapped to the old priest, naked hatred in her expression. "You," she hissed. "I should have killed you years ago when I had the chance." "Take her to the dungeons," Harrison commanded the guards. "The deepest cell, 4 guards at all times. She is to speak to no one. When the Council of Alphas arrives, she will face justice for her crimes." "This isn't over," Victoria snarled as the guards dragged her away. "You think you've won? You think your little Omega witch has saved you? You have no idea what forces you're dealing with." Her final threat echoed in the throne room long after she had gone. Harrison stood motionless, staring at the doors through which she had disappeared, his expression unreadable. "Your Majesty," Magnus said after a long moment, "what are your orders?" Harrison seemed to gather himself, turning to face his Beta and Morgan. "Send riders to all corners of the kingdom. The Council of Alphas must convene within the week. Victoria's allies must be identified and watched. Double the guard on the castle and in the city." Magnus nodded, then hesitated. "And the Lady Morgan?" Harrison's gaze met Morgan's, something complex and unresolved passing between them. "She will be given chambers in the royal wing under my personal protection. She is to be treated with all the respect due to—" He paused, struggling with words that acknowledged what they both felt but were not yet ready to name. "Due to the one who helped bring justice for Queen Callista," Magnus supplied diplomatically. "Yes," Harrison agreed, his eyes still locked with Morgan's. "Exactly so." As Magnus departed to carry out the king's orders, Morgan found herself alone with Harrison in the vast throne room. The bond between them hummed with awareness, with possibility, with questions neither was ready to answer. "What happens now?" Morgan asked softly. Harrison's expression softened slightly, the hard lines of anger giving way to something more vulnerable. "Now we wait for the council. Victoria will face trial. Justice will be done." "And after?" Morgan pressed gently. Harrison looked away, toward the great windows where night had fallen, stars emerging in the velvet darkness. "One step at a time, Morgan. We have traveled a difficult road these past days. Let us rest before we consider what lies beyond the horizon." Morgan nodded, accepting his need for time, for space to process all that had happened. The bond between them was real, but it was new, fragile. It would grow or wither according to their choices in the days to come. "Rest, then," she agreed. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." As a servant led her to chambers more luxurious than any she had occupied in 7 years of wandering, Morgan felt the weight of the day settle upon her shoulders. She had helped bring a murderer to justice. She had found unexpected connection with the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. She had, perhaps, found a place where her gift might be valued rather than feared. But Victoria's final threat lingered in her mind like a shadow. This isn't over. Despite the evidence against her, despite her capture, Victoria had not seemed defeated, only enraged. And something told Morgan that a woman capable of murdering her king's mate and unborn child would not go quietly to her execution. The game had changed, but it was far from over. The chambers given to Morgan were fit for nobility, spacious, elegantly furnished, with tall windows overlooking the castle gardens. A large bed with silken sheets, plush chairs before a hearth where a fire crackled merrily, tapestries depicting forest scenes adorning the walls. After 7 years of sleeping in barns and tavern attics, the luxury was almost overwhelming. Morgan ran her fingers across a polished oak table, marveling at the smoothness. A servant had brought her fresh clothing, practical but fine, made of soft wool and leather dyed in deep forest green. Her old, travel-worn garments had been taken away, presumably to be cleaned or perhaps discarded. She bathed in the copper tub provided, washing away the grime of travel and the memories of the tower. As she dressed in her new clothes, she caught a glimpse of herself in a silver mirror and barely recognized the woman who stared back. Clean, properly dressed, her dark hair shining. She looked almost like she belonged here. But did she? The nascent bond with Harrison hummed in the back of her mind, a constant reminder of the connection neither of them had sought. What would become of her once Victoria faced justice? Would Harrison acknowledge the bond, or would he send Morgan away, unable to face the reminder of what he had lost? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called. Magnus stepped into the room, looking more rested than when they had arrived, though still grave. "Lady Morgan," he said with a slight bow, "His Majesty requests your presence in the royal study." Lady Morgan. The title felt foreign, almost laughable. She was no lady, just an Omega who had survived through sheer determination. "Of course," she replied, following Magnus into the corridor. The royal study was located in the western tower, a circular room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive oak desk. Maps and documents covered every surface, evidence of a kingdom requiring constant attention. Harrison stood by the window, staring out at the city below. He had bathed and changed as well, dressed now in a deep blue tunic with silver embroidery, his black hair tied back with a leather cord. He turned as they entered, his golden eyes finding Morgan immediately. Something passed through them, warmth perhaps, or simply recognition of the bond they shared. "Leave us," he told Magnus, who bowed and departed, closing the door behind him. For a moment, neither spoke. The bond between them seemed to pulse in the silence, drawing them together even as they stood apart. "You look well," Harrison said finally. "The chambers are to your liking?" "They're beautiful," Morgan replied. "Far grander than anything I'm accustomed to." "You will grow accustomed to them," Harrison said with certainty. Then, as if realizing the implication of his words, he looked away. "The Council of Alphas has been summoned. They will arrive within 5 days. "And Victoria?" "Secure in the dungeon. 4 guards at all times, as I ordered. She has said nothing since her arrest." Harrison moved to the desk, his fingers tracing the edge of a map. "Father Nathaniel's evidence is compelling. Letters between Victoria and members of rival packs, financial records showing payment for exotic poisons, journal entries from Counselor Marcus confessing his role in the conspiracy." "Will it be enough?" Morgan asked. "For the council?" Harrison's mouth tightened. "It should be. But Victoria has had 15 years to build alliances, to place loyal supporters in positions of influence. The Council of Alphas includes wolves who owe their positions to her recommendations. You think they might protect her, despite the evidence?" "I think politics makes cowards of many," Harrison said bitterly. "They may not defend her openly, but they might argue for leniency, for exile rather than execution. I cannot allow that. She must pay the full price for what she did." Morgan nodded, understanding his need for justice. "What do you need from me?" Harrison looked at her directly now, his expression softening slightly. "Your testimony will be crucial. The council must hear firsthand what you saw in the tower. Your gift may be rare, but it is recognized in our laws as a valid form of witness." "They will question me," Morgan said. "Challenge me. Call me a fraud or a witch." "They will try," Harrison agreed. "But you will stand firm, and I will stand with you." The words sent warmth through Morgan's chest. After 7 years of facing the world alone, the promise of support, especially from one as powerful as Harrison, was almost dizzying. "There is something else," Harrison said, his tone shifting. "The bond between us." Morgan tensed. Here it was, the conversation she had been both anticipating and dreading. "It is unusual," Harrison continued, choosing his words carefully. "Second mate bonds are rare. Most wolves mate once in a lifetime, if at all. When a mate dies, the surviving partner typically remains alone." "I know," Morgan said quietly. "The elders speak of cases, however. Ancient records tell of wolves who found a second bond after losing their first, always in cases of great significance where the goddess herself seemed to intervene." Morgan remained silent, allowing him to work through his thoughts. "I loved Callista," Harrison said, his voice roughening with emotion. "She was fierce and kind and unafraid to challenge me. Her death left a void I never expected to fill. For 15 years I have ruled alone, let no one close." "I would never try to replace her," Morgan said softly. "No one could." "One." "No," Harrison agreed. "But perhaps that is not what this bond asks of either of us. Perhaps it offers something new, something different." He moved closer to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the pine and winter storm scent that was uniquely his. "I feel the connection between us, Morgan. It grows stronger each day, despite my resistance, despite my grief and rage and confusion." His golden eyes searched hers. "Do you feel it too?" "Yes," Morgan admitted. "Since the tower. Since the moment I touched you." Harrison nodded, as if confirming something to himself. The council's arrival and Victoria's trial must take precedence. But when justice has been served, when Callista and our child have been avenged, then perhaps we can explore what this bond means, if you are willing." It wasn't a declaration of love, it wasn't even a promise. But from Harrison, from this man who had locked away his heart for 15 years, it was a monumental concession. "I am willing," Morgan said simply. Something like relief flickered across Harrison's face. He stepped back, resuming a more formal distance. "Good. Until then, you will remain under my protection. Magnus will assign guards to ensure your safety." "You expect Victoria's allies to move against me?" "I expect nothing and prepare for everything," Harrison replied. Victoria's final words suggested she has resources we do not yet understand. Until she faces judgment, we must be vigilant. Morgan nodded her agreement. "What would you have me do while we wait for the council?" "Rest. Recover your strength. Father Nathaniel wishes to speak with you about your gift. He has studied the old bloodlines and may have insights about your abilities." Harrison's expression softened fractionally. "And perhaps, when duties permit, we might speak again. Not of bonds or trials or vengeance, but simply as two people finding their way forward." "I would like that," Morgan said, unable to keep the warmth from her voice. Harrison inclined his head, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Then his expression turned serious once more. "I must attend to the kingdom. Rumors of Victoria's arrest have already spread through the castle and will soon reach the city. I must address my nobles before speculation runs wild." "Of course," Morgan said, recognizing the dismissal. She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at him. "Harrison?" "Yes?" "Thank you. For believing me when no one else would have." His golden eyes held hers. Truth recognizes truth, Morgan Winters, even when it comes in unexpected forms. The days that followed took on a surreal quality for Morgan. After years of constant movement, of fighting for survival on the margins of society, she found herself at the center of the kingdom's greatest political upheaval in generations. Servants attended her needs, guards shadowed her movements, and nobles watched her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion whenever she ventured from her chambers. True to his word, Harrison had assigned 2 guards to her, solid, trustworthy men named Garrick and Lauren. They maintained a respectful distance but were never far from sight, a constant reminder of her precarious position. Valued enough to protect, dangerous enough to watch. Father Nathaniel visited her chambers on the 2nd day, his aged body moving slowly, but his mind still sharp as a blade. "My lady," he said, bowing slightly as he entered, "I hope I find you well." "Please, Father, I am no lady," Morgan said, gesturing for him to take a seat by the fire. "Just Morgan will do." The priest smiled, lowering himself carefully into the chair. "Titles are but trappings. It is what lies beneath that matters. And beneath your humble exterior lies a rare and precious gift." Morgan sat across from him, curious. "The king said you have studied the old bloodlines, the families with gifts like mine." "Indeed," Nathaniel said, warming his gnarled hands before the fire. "Before I took my vows, I was a scholar at the great library in the Eastern Territories. I specialized in the histories of the gifted bloodlines, those touched by the goddess in special ways." "You believe my ability comes from the goddess?" Morgan asked, surprised. Most had called it witchcraft, a dark and unnatural power. "All true gifts flow from her grace," Nathaniel said firmly. "Your ability to see memories through touch. It is called the sight of echo by the ancient texts. A rare gift, but documented through the centuries." "Echo," Morgan repeated, the word feeling right on her tongue. "Because I see echoes of the past." "Precisely." Nathaniel's eyes twinkled. "The texts speak of great seers who could read the history of a place or object, who could untangle lies from truth by touching what had witnessed events. They served as judges, advisors to kings, keepers of history." Morgan's chest tightened with emotion. All her life, she had believed her gift to be a curse, a burden that had cost her family and home. To hear it spoken of with reverence, to learn she was part of a lineage of respected seers, was almost too much to bear. "There were others?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Others like me?" "Many, though few in each generation. The gift runs strongest in certain bloodlines." Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. "You mentioned your grandmother may have had the sight. Do you know her family name?" Morgan shook her head. "My mother rarely spoke of her. I know only that she came from the Northern Territories and that she died before I was born." Nathaniel stroked his beard thoughtfully. The Northern Territories were home to the Ravencroft line and their allied packs. The king's own bloodline has been rumored to carry various gifts through the generations. Morgan's eyes widened. "Are you suggesting I might be related to the royal line?" Nathaniel chuckled. "Distantly, perhaps. Many bloodlines intertwined over the centuries. What matters is that you understand your gift is not a curse to be hidden, but a blessing to be honored. With training, you might develop it further, gain greater control over when and how the visions come." "Training? Is that possible?" "The ancient texts suggest techniques for those with the sight. Meditation, focus exercises, methods to protect oneself from being overwhelmed by powerful memories." The priest's expression grew solemn. "What you experienced in the tower, feeling Callista's death as if it were your own, such deep immersion can be dangerous to your spirit. You must learn to witness without becoming lost in the vision." Morgan thought of how the vision had drained her, how she had felt Callista's pain and fear as if they were her own. "I would welcome such training, Father." "Then we shall begin tomorrow, if you are willing." Nathaniel rose slowly, leaning on his staff. "For now, I have taken enough of your time. Rest, child. The days ahead will require your strength." After the priest departed, Morgan found herself restless. The luxurious chambers that had seemed so spacious now felt confining after days spent within their walls. She ventured out into the corridor, Garrick and Lauren falling into step behind her. "I wish to walk in the gardens," she told them, "if that is permitted." "Of course, my lady," Garrick replied. "We will accompany you." The castle gardens were a revelation, a vast expanse of carefully tended beds, flowering shrubs, and ancient trees. Paths of crushed stone wound between them, leading to secluded benches and small fountains. Despite the late season, many plants still bloomed, filling the air with sweet fragrance. Morgan walked slowly, savoring the open sky above her, the gentle breeze against her face. After days of tension and darkness, the simple pleasure of sunlight and growing things was like a balm to her spirit. She rounded a corner and stopped short. Ahead, seated on a stone bench beneath an oak tree, was Harrison. He was alone, a rarity for the king, reading from a leather-bound volume. He looked up at her approach, his golden eyes widening slightly in surprise. Morgan hesitated, uncertain if she should intrude on his solitude. But Harrison closed his book and gestured for her to join him. "Your guards are vigilant," he observed as she sat beside him, nodding toward Garrick and Lauren, who had taken positions at a discreet distance. "They follow me everywhere," Morgan said. "Though I can't imagine anyone would be foolish enough to attack me in your own castle." "Never underestimate the foolishness of desperate people," Harrison said grimly. "Victoria's allies are cornered. Cornered wolves are the most dangerous." Morgan nodded, accepting his caution. "What are you reading?" Harrison glanced down at the book in his hands. "Poetry, actually, from the Eastern Kingdoms." A faint flush colored his cheeks, as if embarrassed to be caught in such a sentimental pursuit. "It was Callista's favorite. She would read to me sometimes in the evenings." "That's lovely," Morgan said softly, touched by this glimpse of the man behind the king. "Would you read some to me?" Harrison hesitated, then opened the book to a marked page. This was one she returned to often, he said, and began to read in a low, rich voice. "Though mountains rise between us, though oceans deep divide, the moon that lights your pathway is the same that is my guide. No distance breaks the silver thread that binds your heart to mine, for love, once truly given, transcends both space and time." The words hung in the air between them, achingly beautiful and painfully appropriate. Morgan felt tears prick her eyes, moved by both the poem and the raw emotion in Harrison's voice as he read it. She had a gift for finding beauty in words, Harrison said, closing the book gently, for seeing to the heart of things. She sounds remarkable, Morgan said. She was. Harrison's expression was soft with memory. Then he seemed to gather himself, returning to the present. The Council of Alphas begins to arrive tomorrow. Alpha Kieran of the Eastern Territories and Alpha Elena of the Southern Forests have already sent word they will reach the castle by nightfall. Morgan tensed, her brief moment of peace evaporating. So soon? My summons emphasized the urgency of the matter. Harrison studied her face. Are you afraid? Not afraid, Morgan said, though it wasn't entirely true. Apprehensive. I've spent years avoiding attention, hiding what I am. Now I must stand before the most powerful alphas in the kingdom and convince them to trust in visions they cannot see. You will not stand alone, Harrison reminded her. I will be there, as will Father Nathaniel with his evidence. Morgan nodded, grateful for his reassurance. Has Victoria spoken yet? Confessed? Harrison's expression darkened. No. She maintains her silence, though she watches the guards with a smile that suggests she knows something we do not. He shook his head. Magnus has doubled the watch, but still I sense danger. From where? If I knew, I would eliminate it, Harrison said simply. For now, we can only prepare. Which reminds me. He reached into his tunic and withdrew a small object, holding it out to her. This belongs to you now. Morgan looked down at his open palm, the silver medallion, the one that had started everything when she found it in the archives, cleaned now, its surface gleaming in the sunlight, the intricate symbols clear and precise. Callista's medallion, Morgan said, hesitant to take it. Shouldn't you keep it? It was never truly hers, Harrison said. It was an heirloom, passed through her mother's line, meant for women with the gift of sight. She wore it because it was beautiful, but it never revealed its secrets to her as it did to you. His eyes met hers. It called to you in the archives. It wanted to be found by someone who could see. Morgan reached out slowly and took the medallion. The moment her fingers touched the cool silver, a brief vision flashed, not of Callista this time, but of an older woman with similar red hair, placing the medallion around a young girl's neck, whispering words of protection and guidance. Thank you, Morgan said, slipping the chain over her head. The medallion settled against her chest, warm as if alive. I will honor its purpose. Harrison nodded, satisfied. He rose from the bench. I must return to my duties. The arrival of the Alphas requires preparation. Of course, Morgan said, standing as well. For a moment they stood facing each other, the bond between them humming with awareness, with possibility. Harrison reached out slowly, his fingers lightly brushing her cheek in a touch so brief she might have imagined it. Until tomorrow, he said softly, then turned and strode away down the garden path, his guards falling into step behind him. Morgan watched him go, her heart beating too fast, the medallion warm against her skin. Despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, despite the dangers still lurking in the shadows, she felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Hope. The Council of Alphas began arriving the following day, their processions entering the city one after another in displays of power and prestige. From her window, Morgan watched as banners representing packs from across the kingdom fluttered in the autumn breeze, each alpha bringing an entourage of advisors, guards, and family members. Impressive, isn't it? Magnus said, coming to stand beside her. The kingdom hasn't seen such a gathering in over a decade. So many, Morgan murmured, watching yet another procession enter the main gates. Will they all have a voice in Victoria's judgment? The 12 high alphas will cast the final votes, Magnus explained, but many lesser alphas attend to witness and advise. A judgment of this magnitude affects the entire kingdom. Morgan nodded, anxiety knotting in her stomach. The more witnesses to her testimony, the more who would question and doubt. His Majesty requests your presence at the formal reception tonight, Magnus continued. The Alphas will be presented to the court, and he wishes you to stand with him. Morgan turned to him in surprise. With him? At the reception? Magnus's expression was carefully neutral, at his right hand, where the queen would traditionally stand. The implication was clear, and Morgan felt heat rise to her cheeks. But we haven't, that is, the bond isn't, formal or not, the bond exists, Magnus said gently. The alphas will sense it. Better to acknowledge it openly than to have them discover it through gossip or speculation. Morgan touched the medallion at her throat, drawing comfort from its solid presence. You're right. Of course you're right. I just hadn't expected so soon. His Majesty doesn't make such decisions lightly, Magnus assured her. If he wishes you by his side, it is with full understanding of what that signifies. Morgan took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then I'll need something appropriate to wear. Magnus smiled, some of the severity leaving his weathered face. Already arranged. The royal seamstress awaits you in your chambers. She's quite talented, even working on such short notice. The seamstress, a plump, cheerful woman named Alara, had indeed worked miracles. The gown she had created was elegant, without being ostentatious. Deep forest green silk that complemented Morgan's dark hair and fair skin, with subtle silver embroidery at the neckline and sleeves that echoed the patterns on the medallion. You look like you were born to wear such finery, Alara said approvingly, as Morgan stood before the mirror, barely recognizing herself. The king will be pleased. Morgan doubted Harrison's thoughts would be on her appearance with so much at stake, but she thanked the seamstress regardless. As the woman packed away her supplies, a soft knock sounded at the door. Father Nathaniel entered, smiling at the transformation. My dear, you look radiant, every inch a queen. I'm no queen, Father, Morgan reminded him, but she couldn't help smiling back. The old priest's warmth was infectious. Not yet, perhaps, Nathaniel said with a twinkle in his eye. He dismissed Alara with a kind word, then turned back to Morgan. I've come to offer both advice and a gift before tonight's reception. From within his robes, he withdrew a slender volume bound in faded blue leather. This text contains the histories of those with the sight of echo. I thought you might find comfort in knowing you are not alone in your gift. Morgan accepted the book with reverence, running her fingers over the worn cover. Thank you, Father. I will treasure it. As for advice, Nathaniel continued, his expression growing serious, remember that you stand for truth tonight. Many will question, many will doubt, but truth has a power all its own. Stand firm in it. I will try, Morgan promised. One more thing, the priest said, his voice lowering. Be wary tonight. I have sensed something, a darkness gathering. Victoria's influence runs deeper than we know. Morgan felt a chill run down her spine. You think there will be trouble at the reception? I cannot say for certain, but keep your medallion close and your guards closer. Nathaniel patted her hand reassuringly. And take comfort that the king will be at your side. There is no safer place in the kingdom. When Nathaniel had gone, Morgan opened the book he had given her, leafing through pages of elegant script and detailed illustrations. She found accounts of seers from centuries past who had used their gift to solve mysteries, uncover deceptions, even prevent wars by revealing hidden truths. Men and women who had turned what many considered a curse into a blessing for their packs, their kingdoms. Could she do the same? Could her gift, which had brought her nothing but pain and exile, become something honorable, something valued? The great bell of the castle tolled, signaling an hour before the reception would begin. Morgan closed the book and rose, smoothing the silk of her gown. Tonight would be her first test, facing the alphas not as a prisoner or an oddity, but as a woman standing in truth, standing at the king's side. Garrick and Lauren escorted her through corridors bustling with activity. Servants rushed to and fro carrying trays of food and drink. Nobles in their finest attire chatted in excited clusters. Guards stood at attention at every junction. The entire castle hummed with anticipation. They reached a small antechamber adjacent to the great hall, where Harrison waited. He wore formal attire, black and silver, the colors of the royal house, with a silver circlet resting on his brow. He turned as she entered, and for a moment his golden eyes widened with something like wonder. "Morgan," he said, his voice warm with approval. "You look magnificent." "Thank you, Your Majesty," she replied, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. "As do you." Harrison dismissed the guards with a gesture, leaving them alone in the antechamber. "Tonight will not be easy," he said, moving closer. "The Alphas will watch you closely, assess you, judge you. Some will be kind, many will not." "I understand," Morgan said, lifting her chin. "I have faced judgment before." "Not like this," Harrison warned. "They will see the bond between us, sense it. They will question your motives, your past, your gift. They will seek to undermine your credibility before you ever testify against Victoria." "Let them try," Morgan said with more confidence than she felt. "I have nothing to hide." Harrison's expression softened. He reached out, his fingers brushing the medallion at her throat. "This suits you," he said quietly, "as if it was always meant to be yours." The touch sent a shiver through Morgan, the bond between them pulsing with awareness. "Harrison," she began, not sure what she meant to say. Before she could continue, the door opened and Magnus entered. "Your Majesty, the Alphas are assembled. It is time." Harrison nodded, his hand falling away from the medallion. He offered his arm to Morgan. "Shall we?" Morgan placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fine fabric. Together, they followed Magnus toward the great hall and whatever awaited them there. The great hall had been transformed. Hundreds of candles blazed in ornate holders, casting golden light over the assembled nobility. Banners representing each territory hung from the high rafters, swaying gently in the air currents. The black stone throne stood on its dais at the far end, imposing and ancient. Conversation hushed as Harrison entered with Morgan on his arm. All eyes turned to them, curious, assessing, some openly hostile. Morgan felt the weight of their stares but kept her gaze forward, her spine straight. "His Majesty, King Harrison Ravencroft, Alpha of Alphas, Protector of the Seven Territories," announced the Master of Ceremonies, his voice echoing through the hall. "And Lady Morgan Winters." No title beyond her name, but the position at Harrison's side spoke volumes. Whispers immediately rippled through the crowd as they processed the sight of a woman, an Omega no less, in a place of such honor. Harrison led her through the parting crowd toward the dais. Morgan could feel the Alphas watching them, their power palpable in the air. These were the strongest wolves in the kingdom, each ruler of their own territory, each accustomed to deference and respect. They reached the dais, and Harrison took his place on the throne. Rather than leaving her to stand alone, he gestured to a smaller chair that had been placed at his right hand. Morgan sat, aware of the significance of the position. The Master of Ceremonies began calling forth each Alpha to be formally presented to the king. One by one they approached, each a study in power and control, each flanked by advisors and guards. "Alpha Kieran of the Eastern Territories," the Master called. A tall, lean man with silver-streaked auburn hair approached the throne and bowed. His sharp eyes assessed Morgan openly before returning to Harrison. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hall, "a most unexpected situation brings us together." "Indeed," Harrison replied evenly. "We welcome your wisdom in this grave matter." Kieran's gaze flicked to Morgan again. "I see changes at court since my last visit. Interesting changes." Harrison's expression remained neutral, but Morgan felt tension in him through their bond. "The goddess works in mysterious ways, Alpha Kieran, as we shall discuss when the council convenes." Kieran bowed again and retreated, making way for the next Alpha. "Alpha Elena of the Southern Forests." A woman approached, striking in her confidence. Dark skin, close-cropped hair, and eyes that missed nothing. She bowed to Harrison, then turned to Morgan with open curiosity. "Lady Morgan," she said, surprising everyone by addressing her directly, "I have heard tales of your gift. The sight of Echo is rare in these times." Morgan inclined her head respectfully. "As is a female Alpha, my lady, yet here we both stand, defying expectation." A smile touched Elena's lips. "Well said. I look forward to hearing your testimony." The presentations continued, each alpha bringing their unique presence and politics to the throne. Some were openly friendly to Harrison, others barely concealed their hostility. All regarded Morgan with varying degrees of curiosity, suspicion, or calculation. The reception moved to the formal dinner that followed, Morgan seated at Harrison's right hand at the high table. The great hall had been rearranged, long tables replacing the open space, laden with the finest food the kingdom could offer. "You're handling yourself well," Harrison murmured to her between courses. "Elena seems inclined to support you, and Kieran seems inclined to doubt everything about me," Morgan replied quietly. "Kieran doubts the sun will rise each morning until he sees it himself," Harrison said with the ghost of a smile. "He is cautious but fair. If your evidence convinces him, others will follow." Throughout the meal, various nobles and lesser alphas approached the high table to pay their respects. Morgan noticed a pattern forming. Those loyal to Harrison treated her with cautious respect, while those known to be aligned with Victoria barely acknowledged her presence. As the final course was cleared away, musicians began to play, signaling the transition to the more social portion of the evening. Harrison stood, offering his hand to Morgan. "Traditionally, the king opens the dancing," he explained. "Would you do me the honor?" Morgan hesitated, keenly aware of all eyes upon them. "I'm not much of a dancer," she admitted. 7 years on the road offered few opportunities to learn. "Follow my lead," Harrison said, his golden eyes warm. "I won't let you falter." She took his hand and allowed him to lead her to the center of the hall, where space had been cleared for dancing. The musicians began a stately melody, and Harrison placed one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. "Breathe," he murmured as they began to move. "The steps are simple, like wolves circling before the hunt." Morgan relaxed slightly, letting her body follow his guidance. Harrison was right. The dance did remind her of wolf movements, the careful pacing and turns mirroring how packmates might move together in the forest. "Everyone is watching us," she whispered. "Let them watch," Harrison replied. "Let them see that I have chosen to stand with you, to dance with you. It sends a message stronger than words." As they moved across the floor, other couples joined the dance. Morgan caught glimpses of reaction among the watching nobles, some smiling in approval, others frowning in displeasure, many simply observing with careful neutrality. "Victoria's supporters are not happy," she observed. "No," Harrison agreed, "but they are revealing themselves with every glare, every whispered comment. Magnus is noting each one." The dance ended, and Harrison bowed to her formally. As he straightened, his expression changed subtly, his gaze fixing on something beyond her shoulder. "We have an unexpected guest," he said quietly. Morgan turned to see Father Nathaniel making his way slowly through the crowd, leaning heavily on his staff. The old priest rarely attended court functions, citing his age and health. For him to appear now suggested urgency. Harrison guided Morgan through the dancers toward Nathaniel. As they drew closer, Morgan could see strain in the priest's weathered face, concern in his eyes. "Your Majesty," Nathaniel said with a slight bow. "Lady Morgan, forgive the intrusion, but I must speak with you both, privately." "Of course," Harrison said, glancing around at the curious onlookers. "My study, I think." They slipped away from the reception, followed discreetly by Magnus and the guards. Once in the privacy of the royal study, Nathaniel's composure faltered. "There has been a development," he said, his voice strained. "The guards went to bring Victoria her evening meal and found her cell empty." "What?" Harrison's voice was deadly quiet. "Explain." "The guards were drugged, alive, but unconscious. The cell door was open, though not forced. It appears someone with access to the keys released her." Morgan felt cold dread wash over her. "She's escaped? How is that possible? You had 4 guards on her at all times." "Betrayal," Harrison said, his eyes beginning to glow with anger. "Someone within the castle helped her. Someone with authority." "There's more," Nathaniel said grimly. "I went to the cell myself." On the wall, written in what appears to be blood, was a message. He hesitated, glancing at Morgan. It said, "The Omega Witch dies at midnight. The Omega Witch dies at midnight." The words hung in the air like poison. Morgan felt her blood run cold, but she kept her expression calm, refusing to show fear. Harrison's reaction was immediate. His eyes flared golden with rage, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Lock down the castle," he ordered Magnus. "Every exit, every passage. Double the guard on the walls. No one enters or leaves until Victoria is found." "Yes, Your Majesty." Magnus bowed and hurried from the room to relay the orders. Harrison turned to Father Nathaniel. "When was she discovered missing?" "Less than an hour ago," the priest replied. "The guards on duty were found unconscious but alive. The evening meal was untouched." "So she has a head start," Harrison said grimly. He turned to Morgan. "You will remain with me at all times. If Victoria wants to harm you, she'll have to go through me first." "The reception," Morgan said. "The Alphas. We can't simply disappear." Harrison considered this, then nodded. "You're right. To retreat now would show weakness, and we can't afford that with the Council watching. We return, but with increased security, and we leave before midnight." "Your Majesty," Father Nathaniel said hesitantly. "Forgive me, but if Victoria has escaped with inside help, is anywhere in the castle truly safe?" A muscle ticked in Harrison's jaw. "What do you suggest, old friend?" "The temple," Nathaniel said. "Sacred ground, protected by ancient wards. Victoria would not dare violate sanctuary, and even if she tried, the wards would repel her." Harrison's eyes narrowed in thought. "The temple has only one entrance, easier to defend than the royal apartments with their multiple access points." He nodded decisively. "Very well. After the reception, we go to the temple. Magnus will arrange it discreetly." They returned to the great hall, Harrison's hand firm at Morgan's back, Garrick and Lauren flanking them. To casual observers, nothing seemed amiss, but Morgan noticed additional guards slipping into position around the perimeter of the room. "Smile," Harrison murmured as they rejoined the reception. "Let no one see your concern. Victoria may have spies watching." Morgan forced a smile, accepting a glass of wine from a passing servant. The musicians played on, couples danced, conversation flowed around them, yet now it all seemed like an elaborate charade. Somewhere in the castle, or perhaps beyond its walls already, Victoria was plotting her revenge. As they moved through the crowd, Morgan found herself studying every face, every reaction. Who among these nobles and servants might have helped Victoria escape? Who might still be working with her? Alpha Elena approached them, her dark eyes sharp with perception. "Your Majesty," she said with a slight bow. "Lady Morgan, I couldn't help but notice your brief absence. Is all well?" Harrison smiled smoothly. "Merely a small matter requiring my attention, Alpha Elena. Nothing that should concern the Council." Elena's gaze lingered on Morgan's face. "Indeed? Then why does your companion look as though she has seen a ghost?" "Forgive me," Morgan said quickly. "The evening has been overwhelming. I'm not accustomed to such grand gatherings." Elena studied them both for a moment longer, then nodded. "Of course. A significant adjustment from your previous life, I imagine." She lowered her voice. "A word of caution, Your Majesty. Several of Victoria's closest allies have also disappeared from the reception. Interesting timing, wouldn't you agree?" Harrison's expression remained neutral, but Morgan felt his tension through their bond. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Alpha Elena. Your observance is appreciated." "I have always believed in fair play," Elena replied, "and in justice being properly served." With a final meaningful look, she moved away into the crowd. "She suspects something," Morgan whispered. "Elena misses nothing," Harrison agreed, "but I believe she is an ally, not an enemy. She and Victoria have been at odds for years over trade routes through the southern forests." They continued their circuit of the room, stopping to speak briefly with various nobles, maintaining the pretense of normality. All the while, Morgan felt time slipping away, the clock ticking toward midnight. Magnus reappeared at Harrison's side, bowing slightly. "Your Majesty, the arrangements are complete." Harrison nodded. "Excellent. I believe the hour grows late enough that we may withdraw without causing offense." He raised his voice slightly, addressing the nearest group of nobles. My friends, forgive me, but matters of state require my attention. Please continue to enjoy the festivities." As they turned to leave, Alpha Kirin stepped into their path. "Leaving so soon, Your Majesty? The night is young, and there is much to discuss before tomorrow's council." His tone was pleasant, but Morgan sensed calculation behind his words. Was he merely being diplomatic, or trying to delay them? "Indeed there is, Alpha Kirin," Harrison replied smoothly, "which is why I must review certain documents before our meeting. I'm sure you understand the importance of thorough preparation." Kirin's eyes shifted to Morgan. "And your companion? Will she be assisting with these documents?" "Lady Morgan's testimony is central to the matter at hand," Harrison said, an edge entering his voice. "Her presence is required." Kirin held Harrison's gaze for a moment, then stepped aside with a slight bow. "Of course. Until tomorrow, then." They made their way from the great hall, flanked by guards. Instead of turning toward the royal apartments, they took a less traveled corridor that led toward the eastern wing of the castle. Morgan could feel Harrison's urgency through their bond, his need to get her to safety warring with the necessity of not appearing to flee. "The temple is connected to the castle by an underground passage," Harrison explained, as they descended a narrow spiral staircase. "Few know of its existence. It was built centuries ago to allow the royal family to attend worship without crossing the castle grounds during times of unrest." The passage was lit by torches placed at regular intervals, casting long shadows on the stone walls. Their footsteps echoed in the confined space, the sound of their breathing unnaturally loud. Magnus led the way, with Harrison and Morgan in the center of the formation, and Garrick and Lauren bringing up the rear. They had traveled perhaps halfway when Magnus stopped abruptly, raising his hand for silence. "Listen," he whispered. "Eat." Morgan strained her ears. At first she heard nothing beyond their own breathing. Then a soft scraping sound from somewhere ahead, the unmistakable sound of claws on stone. "We're not alone," Harrison growled, his voice barely audible. Magnus drew his sword, the steel whispering against the scabbard. Harrison pushed Morgan gently behind him, his body already beginning to shift, shoulders broadening, muscles bulging beneath his formal attire. From the darkness ahead, a pair of eyes gleamed, reflecting the torchlight. Then another, and another. Shadow wolves. "How?" Morgan breathed. "How did they get into the passage?" "Someone led them here," Harrison said grimly. "Someone who knew our plan." The shadow wolves advanced, their forms seeming to ripple and change in the flickering light. Morgan counted at least 5 of the unnatural creatures, their mouths opening to reveal too many teeth, their movements jerky and wrong. "Back," Magnus ordered. "We must return to the castle." They began to retreat, keeping their formation tight around Morgan. But as they turned, more gleaming eyes appeared in the darkness behind them. They were surrounded. Harrison completed his shift, tearing through the fine fabric of his formal attire as his body transformed into the massive black wolf that was his true form. His golden eyes blazed in the darkness, fixed on the creatures ahead. Magnus and the guards drew into a tight circle around Morgan, swords ready. The shadow wolves advanced from both directions, unhurried, confident in their trap. "Your Majesty," Magnus said urgently, "you must take Lady Morgan and go. There is a side passage about 20 paces back. It leads to the old crypts. You can reach the surface from there." Harrison growled, clearly reluctant to leave his men. "We will hold them as long as we can," Magnus insisted. "But she must survive. The kingdom needs her testimony." The Black Wolf hesitated only a moment longer, then nudged Morgan forcefully toward the side passage Magnus had indicated. She understood. They had to run. "Be careful," she told Magnus, knowing the words were inadequate. "Go," he replied, already turning to face the approaching shadow wolves. Morgan ran alongside Harrison's wolf form, following the narrow side passage that was little more than a crack in the wall. Behind them, she heard the clash of steel against unnatural flesh, the growls and snarls of battle. She forced herself not to look back, trusting Harrison to lead her to safety. The passage twisted and turned, descending deeper beneath the castle. The air grew colder, damper, with the musty scent of earth and old death. They emerged into a vast chamber lined with stone sarcophagi, the royal crypts, final resting place of kings and queens from centuries past. Harrison paused, his wolf ears swiveling as he listened for pursuit. The sounds of battle had faded, but whether because they had left it behind or because it was over, Morgan couldn't tell. After a moment, Harrison padded forward, leading her between the ancient tombs toward a narrow staircase at the far end of the crypt. As they reached the stairs, a soft laugh echoed through the chamber. "How predictable you are, Harrison. Always the gallant protector." Victoria stepped from behind a massive sarcophagus, her elegant appearance unchanged despite her time in the dungeon. Her blonde hair was still perfectly arranged, her blue gown immaculate. Only her eyes betrayed her true nature, cold and hard as ice. Harrison snarled, positioning himself between Morgan and Victoria. The former advisor tisked softly, shaking her head. "Really, Harrison, there's no need for dramatics. I simply want to talk before the council ruins everything tomorrow." Her gaze shifted to Morgan. "You and I have much to discuss, little seer." Harrison's growl deepened, his massive form tensing to spring. Victoria sighed and made a small gesture with her hand. From the shadows around the crypt, figures emerged, at least a dozen men wearing the livery of various noble houses. All carried weapons. All had the hard eyes of killers. "I wouldn't if I were you," Victoria said conversationally. "My friends here are quite eager to prove their loyalty, and while you might kill several before they brought you down, what would happen to your precious Omega in the meantime?" Harrison hesitated, clearly calculating the odds. Too many to fight while protecting Morgan. "Shift back," Victoria commanded. "Let us speak as civilized beings." For a tense moment, Morgan thought Harrison would refuse. Then, with obvious reluctance, his form began to change, fur receding, limbs elongating, until the man stood where the wolf had been. The transformation had shredded what remained of his formal attire, leaving him bare-chested, wearing only torn trousers. "What do you want, Victoria?" Harrison demanded, his voice cold with fury. Victoria smiled, a gesture that never reached her eyes. "What I've always wanted. Stability for the kingdom, order, balance of power, all the things that have guided my service for 30 years. You call murdering my mate and unborn child service?" Harrison's voice was deadly quiet. "I call it necessary sacrifice," Victoria replied without a hint of remorse. "Callista would have given you an heir, a direct line. You would have ruled absolutely, dismantling the checks on royal power that have kept this kingdom stable for centuries." She stepped closer, her gaze intense. "You were meant to be a strong king, yes, but one guided by wise counsel, not a tyrant with a dynasty." "You had no right," Harrison growled, his control slipping, golden eyes beginning to glow. "I had every right," Victoria countered, "as one sworn to protect the kingdom, even from its king if necessary." She turned her attention to Morgan, and now history repeats itself. Another mate, another threat to the balance of power. Her smile turned cruel. "Though I must admit, you've surprised me, Harrison. I never thought you'd replace Callista with a gutter rat." Morgan felt Harrison's rage spike through their bond, knew he was seconds from attacking despite the odds. She placed a steadying hand on his arm. "She's baiting you," she murmured. "She wants you to lose control." Victoria laughed, the sound echoing among the tombs. "Oh, she's cleverer than she looks. Yes, Harrison, listen to your little Omega. I am indeed baiting you, because I want you to understand exactly what's at stake." She began to pace, her movements graceful and predatory. "Tomorrow, the Council of Alphas will convene. They will hear wild accusations against me, based on the visions of an Omega vagabond and documents that may easily have been forged. Some will believe, many will doubt." She paused, looking directly at Harrison. "And the kingdom will fracture, divided between your supporters and mine. Civil war will follow. Thousands will die. And for what? Revenge for a mate 15 years dead?" "Justice," Harrison corrected, "not revenge." "Call it what you will," Victoria said dismissively. "The cost is too high." "What are you proposing?" Morgan asked, earning a surprised look from both Harrison and Victoria. Victoria studied her for a moment, as if reassessing her. A compromise. I will go into exile, leaving the kingdom forever. The official story will be that I retired due to age and declining health. No trial, no accusations, no civil war. And in return? Harrison asked skeptically. You continue to rule as you have these 15 years, with the Council of the Alphas, with respect for the ancient balance of power. Victoria's gaze hardened. And the Omega leaves, tonight, never to return. No, Harrison said immediately. Victoria shrugged. Then we proceed to trial, and the kingdom burns. She gestured to her armed supporters. My allies are many and powerful, Harrison. Even if the council finds against me, they will not let me be executed without a fight. Morgan's mind raced. Victoria's offer was a trap. Of course it was. The moment they were separated, she would find a way to eliminate both of them. But perhaps they could use this opportunity. I need to speak with the king, Morgan said firmly. Privately. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Planning your escape? By all means. She stepped back, though her guards remained vigilant. You have 3 minutes. Morgan pulled Harrison a few steps away, keeping her voice low. She's lying. She'll never honor any agreement. I know, Harrison growled. We reject her offer and fight our way out. No, Morgan said urgently. The odds are too great. We need time. Harrison frowned. What are you suggesting? Morgan took a deep breath. I accept her terms. I leave the castle tonight. Absolutely not, Harrison said, his expression darkening. I will not lose another mate to her schemes. The words sent warmth through Morgan despite their dire situation. Listen to me. She needs to believe she's won. Once I'm outside the castle, Father Nathaniel can help me. The temple has sanctuary rights. Even Victoria's supporters wouldn't dare violate them. It's too dangerous, Harrison insisted. I can't protect you if we're separated. Morgan touched his face gently. You have to trust me. This is the only way to gain time for Magnus to rally your loyal guards, for the council to hear the evidence. Harrison's struggle was visible in his eyes, the bond between them thrumming with his fear for her safety, his rage at Victoria, his desperate need to protect what was his. Finally, with visible effort, he nodded. If you're not safe in the temple by dawn, I will tear this kingdom apart to find you, he promised, his voice rough with emotion. Morgan smiled sadly. I know you will. They turned back to Victoria, who watched them with calculated amusement. Have you made your decision? Harrison's face was a mask of cold fury. Morgan leaves tonight. You go into exile tomorrow, after I announce your retirement to the council. If any harm comes to her, our agreement is void, and I will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Victoria smiled triumphantly. Wise choice, Harrison. Perhaps you've learned something about necessary sacrifice after all. She gestured to 2 of her guards. Escort the Omega to the city gates. Make sure she keeps moving south. I'll need my cloak and some provisions, Morgan said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Of course, Victoria said magnanimously. We're not barbarians after all. She nodded to another guard, who disappeared up the stairs, presumably to fetch Morgan's things. Harrison pulled Morgan into a fierce embrace. Through their bond, she felt everything he couldn't say aloud, his fear, his rage, his determination to find her again. Be careful, he whispered against her hair. Trust me, she whispered back, and watch for Father Nathaniel. They separated reluctantly, Victoria's guards already moving forward to take Morgan's arms. Harrison stood rigid with suppressed fury, his golden eyes never leaving hers as the guards led her toward the stairs. As she ascended, leaving Harrison in the crypt with Victoria and her remaining supporters, Morgan touched the medallion at her throat, drawing strength from its solid presence. The path ahead was dangerous, uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she was not truly alone. She had a purpose, she had allies, and she had a bond that transcended physical distance. Victoria might believe she had won, but the game was far from over. The guards escorted Morgan through deserted corridors, avoiding the areas where the reception continued in ignorant celebration. The guard Victoria had sent ahead met them at a side entrance to the castle, bringing Morgan's travel cloak and a small sack of provisions. "Generous of Lady Victoria," Morgan commented as she fastened the cloak around her shoulders. The guard grunted. "Her orders: get you out of the city fast. No witnesses." They led her out into the night, the autumn air sharp with cold. The city streets were quiet at this late hour, only a few taverns still showing lights in their windows. They took back alleys and narrow passages, avoiding the night watch. Morgan walked in silence, her mind racing. The temple was her destination, but the guards were clearly under orders to escort her well beyond the city walls. She would need to create an opportunity to escape them once they were outside the gates. As they approached the southern gate, one of the guards gripped her arm tightly. "Not a word," he warned. "The gate guards think you're a palace servant being escorted home. Understand?" Morgan nodded, letting her shoulders slump as if in defeat. The city guards at the gate barely glanced at them, waving them through after a cursory question about their business. Beyond the walls, the road stretched into darkness, bordered by fields now harvested for the winter. Morgan could see lights from scattered farmhouses in the distance, but their immediate surroundings were shrouded in shadow. "How far are you taking me?" she asked as they continued down the road. "Far enough," one guard replied curtly. "Keep moving." They walked for perhaps half an hour, the city walls receding behind them. The guards kept a brisk pace, clearly eager to complete their task and return to the castle. Morgan bided her time, watching for the right moment. It came when they reached a crossroads. As the guards paused to confer about which direction to take, Morgan touched the medallion at her throat and whispered, "Goddess, guide me." To her astonishment, the medallion grew warm beneath her fingers. A soft silvery glow emanated from it, barely visible beneath the fabric of her gown. The guards, engaged in their discussion, didn't notice. Morgan felt a gentle tug, as if the medallion were pulling her toward the western road, not south as the guards intended, but toward the sacred grove where the temple stood outside the city walls. "This way," one guard decided, pointing south. "There's a village about 3 miles on. You can find lodging there for the night." "I need a moment," Morgan said, feigning exhaustion. "Please, just a brief rest." The guards exchanged annoyed glances, but nodded. "Make it quick." Morgan moved a few steps off the road, as if seeking privacy. The medallion pulsed warmer against her skin, its pull toward the west more insistent. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Then she ran. Not south, not back toward the city, but west, toward the dark line of trees that marked the edge of the sacred grove. She heard shouts of surprise behind her, then the pounding of boots as the guards gave chase. Morgan ran as she had never run before, her heart hammering in her chest, her breath coming in gasps. The medallion burned against her skin, guiding her through the darkness. Behind her, the guards were gaining ground, their longer legs and greater strength giving them the advantage. The edge of the grove loomed ahead, ancient oaks and elms forming a wall of shadow. If she could just reach the trees, she might find a place to hide, to lose her pursuers. 20 yards. 10. 5. A hand grasped at her cloak, fingers catching the fabric. Morgan twisted away, the clasp tearing free, the cloak falling into her pursuer's hands. She stumbled forward into the darkness of the grove. Immediately she felt a change in the air. The grove was silent, unnaturally so. No night birds called, no insects chirped. Even the sounds of pursuit seemed muffled, distant. The medallion pulsed with warmth, pulling her deeper among the ancient trees. Morgan followed its guidance, weaving between massive trunks, ducking under low-hanging branches. She could hear the guards crashing through the undergrowth behind her, but their voices sounded strange, distorted, as if coming from much farther away than they truly were. The trees thinned, revealing a small clearing. In its center stood a circle of standing stones, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, and in the middle of the circle, illuminated by moonlight, waited Father Nathaniel. "Quickly, child!" he called, extending his hand toward her. "Cross the threshold!" Morgan stumbled forward, gasping for breath. As she passed between two of the standing stones, she felt a strange sensation, like walking through a curtain of water. Behind her, she heard shouts of confusion, then anger. She turned to see her pursuers standing at the edge of the stone circle, unable or unwilling to cross into it. They paced like frustrated predators, calling threats, but came no closer. "They cannot enter," Father Nathaniel explained, his voice calm despite the tension in his eyes. "The sacred circle is protected by wards as ancient as the kingdom itself. Those with violence in their hearts cannot cross the boundary." "How did you know?" Morgan asked, still struggling to catch her breath. "How did you know I would come here?" The old priest smiled, gesturing to the medallion still glowing faintly at her throat. "The medallion is more than a mere trinket. It is a key, a guide, a protector. I suspected it would lead you here if needed." He looked toward the fuming guards, though I confess I had hoped circumstances would be less dramatic. Morgan touched the medallion wonderingly. It guided me. I felt it pulling me toward the grove. "As it was meant to," Nathaniel said. "Come. The temple lies at the heart of the grove. We will be safer there, and I must tend to those scratches on your arms." Morgan looked down, surprised to see several cuts on her forearms from branches she had pushed through in her flight. In the adrenaline of escape, she hadn't even noticed. The guards shouted final threats before retreating, no doubt to report their failure to Victoria. Morgan watched them go, then turned to follow Father Nathaniel deeper into the grove. They walked in silence for several minutes, the priest leading the way along a path that seemed to appear just as they needed it. Finally, the trees opened up to reveal a small stone temple, simple but beautiful in its ancient dignity. Light glowed from its windows, promising warmth and safety within. "The Temple of the Silver Moon," Nathaniel said, "oldest sanctuary in the kingdom, built before the first kings ruled. Even Victoria will hesitate to violate its protection." Inside, the temple was a single circular chamber, dominated by a pool of still water in the center. Moonlight streamed through an opening in the roof, illuminating the pool with silver light. Around the walls, niches held candles and small offerings, flowers, polished stones, simple wooden carvings of wolves. An elderly woman in gray robes approached, bowing to Father Nathaniel. "The preparations are complete, Father." "Thank you, Sister Alara." Nathaniel turned to Morgan. "This is the temple's caretaker. She will tend to your wounds while I make sure our defenses are secure." Sister Alara led Morgan to a small side chamber where a basin of warm water and clean bandages waited. With gentle efficiency, she cleaned and dressed Morgan's scratches, then provided a simple robe to replace her torn gown. "The father said you might come," Alara commented as she worked. "Said the medallion would bring you if there was need." "You know about the medallion?" Morgan asked. The old woman nodded, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Oh, yes. It's been part of temple lore for generations. The seer's key, we call it, made to guide those with the gift to sanctuary when danger threatens." She finished tying the last bandage. "There, that should do. You must be exhausted, child." Morgan nodded, the events of the day finally catching up with her. "What happens now?" "Now you rest," Father Nathaniel said, returning to the chamber. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. The Council of Alphas will convene, and Harrison will have to navigate Victoria's deception without revealing your location." "He's still in danger," Morgan said, worry for Harrison a constant ache in her chest. "Victoria won't honor her promise to go into exile. She'll try to eliminate him too." "Perhaps," Nathaniel agreed. "But Harrison has survived 15 years of her manipulations. He is no fool, and now he is forewarned. Magnus will have rallied loyal guards by now, and many of the Alphas will stand with him once they understand what is at stake." Morgan touched the medallion, which had cooled to its normal temperature. "I need to do more than hide. Victoria must be exposed for what she is. The Council must know the truth about Callista's death." Nathaniel studied her thoughtfully. "There may be a way. The temple has secrets of its own, ways to communicate that Victoria would never suspect." He gestured to the main chamber. "But first, you must rest. Take what sleep you can. I will wake you before dawn." Morgan reluctantly agreed, allowing Sister Alara to guide her to a simple pallet near the sacred pool. Despite her worries, exhaustion claimed her quickly, pulling her into deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to Father Nathaniel's gentle touch on her shoulder. The temple was still dark, illuminated only by a few guttering candles. "It is time," the priest said softly. "The council gathers at first light." Morgan rose, accepting a cup of herbal tea from Sister Alara. "How long was I asleep?" "A few hours," Nathaniel replied. "Enough, I hope. Come, there is something you must see." He led her to the sacred pool, now lit with dozens of small floating candles. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the candles and the fading stars visible through the opening in the roof. "The seers of old used this pool for more than divination," Nathaniel explained. "They found ways to project their visions, to share what they had seen with others. With the medallion's help, you might do the same." Morgan looked dubiously at the pool. "I've never controlled my visions. They come when they will, triggered by touch." "The medallion will focus your gift," Nathaniel said, "and the sacred waters will amplify it. If we succeed, what you witnessed in the tower can be shared directly with the Council of Alphas." "How?" Morgan asked, her pulse quickening with hope. "I'm hidden here. They are in the castle." Father Nathaniel smiled mysteriously. "The temple has a twin pool in the castle's own chapel, a connection established centuries ago when kings still honored the old ways. If we can activate it, your vision will appear in that pool, visible to all who stand before it." Morgan's hand went to the medallion. "What must I do?" "Kneel at the pool's edge," Nathaniel instructed. "Hold the medallion in both hands and focus on what you saw in the tower. Every detail, every word, every emotion. Sister Alara and I will conduct the ritual that opens the connection." Morgan did as instructed, kneeling beside the still water. She clasped the medallion in both hands, closing her eyes to better recall the vision of Callista's death, the coldness of the tower room, the smell of illness, Victoria's merciless eyes as she watched poison do its work, Callista's final defiance and sorrow. Every detail came back with painful clarity. Behind her, Father Nathaniel and Sister Alara began to chant in an ancient language, their voices rising and falling in measured cadence. The medallion grew warm between Morgan's palms, then hot, though it did not burn her. She opened her eyes to see the pool's surface rippling, though no wind disturbed the temple. The water began to glow with silvery light, matching the light now streaming from between her fingers where she held the medallion. "It's working," Nathaniel said, his voice strained with effort. "The connection is forming. Focus, Morgan. Project what you saw into the pool." Morgan leaned forward, staring into the glowing water. She poured her memories into it, everything she had witnessed in the tower, every moment of Callista's final hours. The water's surface changed, images forming and shifting, taking on color and substance. Callista appeared, lying on her simple pallet, red hair spread around her pale face. Victoria stood over her, cruel and triumphant. Their voices emerged from the pool, as clear as if they stood in the temple itself. "Why?" Callista's weak voice asked. "We trusted you. Harrison trusted you." "Exactly," Victoria replied coldly. "His trust makes him weak. You made him weak. A king does not need love, girl. He needs power, control." The scene played out in full. Victoria's confession, her justification for murder, Callista's final moments of defiance, her last message of love to Harrison, her protection of the child she carried. As the vision faded, Morgan slumped forward, exhausted by the effort. Father Nathaniel caught her shoulders, steadying her. "You've done it," he said, awe in his voice. "The vision has been sent. Now we can only pray that Harrison has found a way to bring the council to the castle chapel." Morgan nodded wearily, the medallion cooling against her skin. "He will," she said with certainty. "He'll find a way." At the same moment, in the castle chapel, Harrison stood before an identical pool, surrounded by the Council of Alphas. He had convinced them to begin their deliberations with a traditional prayer for wisdom and justice, a custom long neglected, but one no alpha could reasonably refuse. As they gathered around the ancient pool embedded in the chapel floor, Harrison silently thanked Father Nathaniel for the cryptic message delivered by a temple novice just before dawn. "The old ways remember, the waters speak, truth shines in reflection." The pool, dormant for generations, suddenly began to glow with silver light. The assembled alphas stepped back in shock and awe as images formed on the water's surface, as voices emerged from its depths. They watched in stunned silence as Callista's murder played out before them. Witnessed Victoria's cold confession, her calculated betrayal, heard her justify the murder of their king's mate and unborn child as necessary sacrifice for political stability. When the vision faded, leaving the pool once more still and dark, not a voice was raised in doubt. Victoria's guilt had been displayed for all to see in a manner no forgery could accomplish, through magic as old as the kingdom itself. Harrison looked around the circle of alphas, meeting each gaze in turn. "Now you know the truth," he said simply. "Now you understand what justice I seek." Alpha Elena was the first to step forward. "By the goddess's own hand, the truth has been revealed. I stand with you, King Harrison. Victoria must answer for her crimes." One by one, the other alphas voiced their agreement. Even Kieran, most skeptical of all, bowed his head in acknowledgement. "No one can deny what we have witnessed," he said gravely. "The council stands united. Victoria shall face our judgment." Harrison felt the bond thrum with Morgan's exhaustion and relief. Though separated by distance, they had succeeded together. Victoria's deception was exposed, her power broken. Justice for Callista was finally within reach. As the alphas filed out to begin formal proceedings against Victoria, Harrison remained by the pool, placing his hand on its stone rim. "Thank you," he whispered, knowing somehow that Morgan would hear, would feel his gratitude and pride through their bond. "Come home when it is safe. Come home to me." And in the temple beyond the city walls, Morgan smiled, feeling Harrison's words in her heart as clearly as if he stood beside her. "I will," she promised. "I will."